Chapter 378. Qin Mashue had thought of many possibilities. Li Tianlan was very strong. He had the combat capability of the invincible realm at the age of 22. In this maneuver, no one was his opponent in a one-on-one fight. Qin Mashue knew very well that even if he had the Heaven Punishment Sword formation, it would be difficult to send Li Tianlan to hell. After all, his strength was a little weak. The strength of the members of the sword formation was also a little weak. The real Heaven Punishment Sword formation was centered by a real expert at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm, assisted by 2 experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm, and other experts of the Fire-Flaming Realm. After the sword intent was condensed, the Heaven Punishment Sword formation was almost no less than the full blow of the top expert of the half-step Invincible Realm. Now the strength of the Heaven Punishment Sword formation formed by Qin Mashue was uneven. He himself was also a long way from the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm. In such a sword formation, the sword move he exerted was at most infinitely close to the half-step Invincible Realm. Naturally, such a sword move could not kill Li Tianlan. But according to Qin Mashue's expectation, this sword move could at least seriously injure Li Tianlan. After all, according to the information they received, Li Tianlan had fought Gu Qianchuan and Gu Xingyun a few days ago. He was injured and was not in his peak state at all. Even if Li Tianlan broke their sword formation, he was bound to pay the price. Qin Mashue had thought of too many scenes after Li Tianlan was injured. At the moment, Li Tianlan was indeed injured. Blood flowed down the corner of Li Tianlan's mouth. The sword energy of the Heaven Punishment Sword seemed to tear the skin on his arm. The red blood spread along the cuff and dyed Li Tianlan's entire palm red. Li Tianlan's essence, qi and spirit did not decline at all. Instead, he became crazier and colder. He exerted a little force in his palm, grabbed Qin Mashue's neck, and lifted him up directly. Qin Mashue's face gradually turned purple, and he had difficulty breathing. He struggled subconsciously. In his sight, Li Tianlan's eyes were bloodshot, and the blood densely occupied the whites of his eyes. His eyes were scarlet. It was an indescribable violence and demonic. Wild, cold, fierce, irritable without the so-called reason and thinking. At this moment, Li Tianlan was full of an indescribable strangeness and demonic nature. Qin Mashue spat out a mouthful of blood. He wanted to laugh, but he was extremely aggrieved. What had the Heaven Punishing Sword formation, which was regarded as one of the trump cards of the drill, done? It just left some superficial injuries on Li Tianlan. Oh, maybe he even broke a branch? This was the result of the battle? What made Qin Mashue most aggrieved was that the so-called Heaven Punishment Sword formation was just a starting move. The sword formation had just been formed when it was broken. No words could describe the absurdity in Qin Mashue's heart. When the shadow of the giant sword pressed down on Li Tianlan like a flowing light, the sword intent of the shattering land was released in his hand. It was so subtle yet so fierce and fast. The blood-stained palm tore apart the sword intent of the giant sword in an instant. When the Heaven Punishment Sword was about to reach its peak, the palm directly grabbed his neck and pulled him down. Heaven Punishing Sword. The light curtain at the beginning was not, nor was the shadow of the giant sword. The real Sky Punishment Sword was Qin Mashue's own sword as the core of the sword formation. The sword was interrupted by Li Tianlan at the most subtle moment when it was close to the peak. The slightest error could lead to a huge error. It was so exaggerated that it was like a coincidence. What was more exaggerated was that Qin Mashue did not feel Li Tianlan's sword intent or his power during the whole process. It seemed that the other party just stretched out his hand and then everything was over. How did you? Li Tianlan's palm was getting tighter and tighter. Qin Mashue held Li Tianlan's palm tightly, and his voice was hoarse and distorted. Li Tianlan glanced at him. His eyes were cold and indifferent. Li Tianlan lifted Qin Mashue's hand and suddenly smashed Qin Mashue's body into the ground. Plop. It was not the dull sound of the body falling to the ground. Li Tianlan took the opportunity to smash Qin Mashue's body as if it had been smashed directly into the water. A faint blue light appeared on the ground silently. The light continued to refract, spread, and converged with each other. That was the most violent lightning. But at this moment, the lightning was like water gathering hard and soft. Countless rays of light intertwined into the water surface, which dissolved most of the power that Li Tianlan had exerted on Qin Mashue. Blood kept gushing from the corners of Qin Mashue's mouth. The Heaven Punishment Sword was interrupted by Li Tianlan at the most subtle moment. The sword intent did not pour out, but directly exploded in his body. Li Tianlan's power, which had been dissolved by more than half, rushed into his body and directly destroyed the balance in his body. Qin Mashue's face was pale, and his aura declined in an instant. The Heaven Punishment Sword did not seriously injure Li Tianlan. Instead, it directly made Qin Mashue lose his combat capability. The water waves gathered by the lightning were still surging, wrapping Qin Mashue and spreading up along his legs. Li Tianlan loosened his hand and turned around abruptly. At the end of the water and lightning, Wang Xingxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, slowly walked over. The heavenly son of Beihai, who had always been modest and gentle, had no smile on his face at this time. His face was expressionless and his eyes were cold. He held the broad and heavy sword tightly in his hand, and his whole body was surging with sword energy. Li Tianlan's scarlet eyes immediately locked on the vital parts of Wang Xingxiao's body. Let him go. Wang Xingxiao gently raised the giant sword in his hand, looked at Li Tianlan and said in a calm tone. Boundless sword intent whizzed around him and gathered toward the ether sword in his hand. He looked straight into Li Tianlan's eyes, with an irresistible toughness and majesty. Li Tianlan's scarlet eyes grew crazier. He put his palm on the top of Qin Mashue's head. The water-like lightning continued to spread along Qin Mashue's body. Li Tianlan's palm also lit up with a touch of blue, and then it turned into blazing white. The blue water waves and the blazing white sword intent, one above the other, were in a stalemate with Qin Mashue's body as the battlefield. Qin Mashue's face suddenly twisted as if he was suffering great pain. Let him go. Wang Xingxiao's eyes grew colder, and the surging sword intent around him had a touch of killing intent and mania. He had to keep Qin Mashue alive. Qin Mashue was different from ordinary elites. In fact, although his talent was not as good as that of the real young chosen one, it was not much worse. In the vast deep-sea academy, except for Jiang Shangyu's 3000 World and Song Sea's Phantom, the Blizzard was the most powerful organization. Qin Mashue took the initiative to approach him, and the Wang family of Beihai had no reason to let go of such a talent. This was the era of the Chosen One. But under the brilliance of the Chosen One, other people might shine. In the era of Wang Tianzong, Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun, there would also be figures like Dongqing Wudi, Situ Tsangyue Gu Qianchuan, and the Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu. With Qin Mashue's talent 10 years later, he could definitely grow into a top superior of the half-step invincible realm. Such a person would definitely be the most important in the team Wang Xingxiao would set up in the future. You? Li Tianlan looked at Wang Xingxiao and sneered. His voice was a little weird, a little stiff and hollow, but it sounded from all directions grand and indifferent. Wang Xingxiao glanced at Qin Mashue. The two looked at each other for a moment. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his palm. The blazing white lightning gathered in his palm. 21st blade as shatter of land. Kill? The moment the sword intent broke out in Li Tianlan's palm, Wang Xingxiao suddenly raised the giant sword in his hand. Qin Mashue's face was completely distorted, and he suddenly roared. The lightning and water waves that wrapped his body faded. Qin Mashue's whole body was spurting blood. The blood shone with a mournful red luster with wisps of sword intent. That was the sky-punishing sword intent that exploded in Qin Mashue's body. In an instant, the sword intent in the blood and the water-like lightning blended with each other. In every corner, the elites of Blizzard and Phantom drew their swords at the same time. Wang Xingxiao's figure appeared in the sky, and the dark giant sword pointed at Li Tianlan with a cold light. In an instant, it seemed that all the sword intent madly gathered toward Wang Xingxiao's body. Sky-punishing. Wang Xingxiao's loud and majestic voice rang out like thunder. The surging sword intent rose from the bottom to the top, and the whole world turned into a dazzling blue in the blink of an eye. The roaring thunder rolled down from the sky. The sun retreated under the blue sword intent, and it rained heavily in the sky. The blue sword rain. Li Tianlan broke Qin Mashue's sky-punishing sword formation. But Qin Mashue was still there, and so was the incomplete sword formation. Wang Xingxiao's appearance directly replaced Qin Mashue as the new core of the sky-punishing sword formation, and Qin Mashue, who was seriously injured, became a support with the remaining sky-punishing sword intent. This sword strike was abrupt and violent. The sword rain fell and gathered. Wang Xingxiao's figure was getting higher and higher, and this sword was out of everyone's sight. His figure disappeared in an instant. The torrential rain directly gathered together with the messy sword intent. The sword rain merged and everyone's sword intent completely gathered together, turning into a beam of blue light that was so bright that it could run through the sky and the earth. One end of the beam was the sky, and the other end was Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan suddenly put his hands together. The sword intent of the shattering of land kept blooming between his hands, and the blazing white light intertwined in front of him, turning into a light curtain. the torrential rain turned into a beam of light, and the beam of light shone straight down and fell on the light curtain. The whole light curtain suddenly shook and a lot of blood spilled behind the light curtain. Li Tianlan's blood. Boom. Countless sword intents surged together and exploded directly. The blazing white light curtain was shattered in an instant, and the beam of light formed by the sword rain completely disappeared. In the messy light and shadow, Li Tianlan's clothes were completely torn, and his whole body was covered with blood. His face was pale and a wound on his forehead kept spurting blood. The blood covered his face, making him look extremely ferocious. Ah! Li Tianlan's eyes were scarlet and he suddenly roared. He suddenly tore off his torn shirt and roared with all his strength. Blood flowed down from his body. At this moment, Li Tianlan was like a wounded beast, with no sense left, only madness. The sword intent of the shattering of land flowed in his hands and changed instantly. The 14th blade, slaughter. The crazy killing intent spread all over the sky with the awe-inspiring flashing sword light. The shattering of land was the sword of shattering. The 14th blade was the heart of slaughter. The two sword intents merged with each other and superimposed to form a new sword. The 17th blade, Azura. All the blood dripping down from Li Tianlan's body floated in the air at the same time. The blood gathered into a scarlet sword in front of him. Li Tianlan, who was like a bloody man, suddenly reached out and held the blood sword in his hand. In an instant, the endless blood-colored sword light suddenly burst out. The sword light rose above the ground, like a bloody tide surging with killing intent. Wang Xingxiao's figure appeared in the sky. He held the hilt of firmament tightly with both hands and fell straight down from the top. His figure was so far away, so clear. There was no sword light, no faint blue. There was only one person and one sword. Falling. Sprinting. His speed was getting faster and faster. The dark firmament rubbed against the air, igniting flames, and then the flames were extinguished under the high speed. A sword intent so grand that it almost didn't exist directly covered with Wang Xingxiao's figure. A faint blue dot burned on the blade of firmament. Twinkle, twinkle, twinkle. The flickering blue dot was very small, but it was as grand as the whole sky. It wasn't that there was no sword intent between heaven and earth. All the sword intent turned into heaven and earth with this heaven punishment sword. The bloody tide rose against the sky. Li Tianlan was as ferocious as a devil and as crazy as Azura. The heaven punishment sword intent that covered heaven and earth fell directly into the bloody tide. Wang Xingxiao's figure was surrounded by the blood-colored sword light, but for the first time, it was so clear and so majestic. The faint blue dot on firmament became brighter and brighter in the bloody sword light. The half-style samsara he wanted to cultivate failed and he was seriously injured. Under such circumstances, with the help of the heaven punishment sword formation, this could almost be said to be Wang Xingxiao's strongest sword. The sword intent continued to stack and condense, and this sword steadily entered the half-step invincible realm. It was not an ordinary half-step invincible realm. This was equivalent to Wang Xingxiao's full strength after he entered the half-step invincible realm. It was like heaven and earth were squeezing at the same time. The blood-colored sword light stagnated. The faint blue dot on the blade of firmament expanded instantly. This sword was like heaven and earth, like eternity. The huge blade collided with the bloody sword condensed by blood. The picture seemed to freeze for a moment. The faint blue was no longer flashing. The bloody light was no longer restless. Without a sound, all the sword intent and sword chi shattered one after another. A fierce storm suddenly rose on the flat ground in front of the warehouse. The storm surged and exploded in absolute silence, and the aftermath swept through every corner of the battlefield. Qin Mashue, who was seriously injured and was about to leave the battlefield, and more than a dozen elites of Shadow and the Blizzard were all swallowed by the storm in an instant. The chaotic bloody light rose in the storm, and the broken limbs and corpses were completely broken in the storm. The storm continued to sweep across the flat ground and rushed into the dense forest. Countless trees were uprooted and broken in the air under the storm. The sword intent was still raging. Boom! After the silent destruction, there was finally a deafening bang. Wang Xingxiao and Li Tianlan spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time. With Li Tianlan as the center, the hard and flat ground suddenly collapsed and became a deep pit. Water stains appeared in the deep pit. The water stains turned into streams and quickly filled the whole pit. The flat ground turned into a pool of water. Li Tianlan's figure was directly blasted out nearly 200 meters in the broken sword intent. He smashed through the thick wall of the warehouse and disappeared from everyone's sight. Wang Xingxiao's figure rushed into the dense forest uncontrollably. A pair of palms suddenly appeared from behind and grabbed Wang Xingxiao. Under the huge impact, the two of them retreated nearly 20 meters before they stopped. Wang Xingxiao spat out a mouthful of blood again. His face was pale, but his eyes were unprecedentedly cold. What's going on? A voice sounded behind Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao looked up at the person. The person who caught him was Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City. The three young heavenly sons had completely gathered. Wang Xingxiao gritted his teeth and stood up, saying with a smile, Li Tianlan lost. He could be sure of his injury, and he could also be sure of Li Tianlan's injury. One was Li Tianlan without the abnormal protection of the cloud silk robe, and the other was not in the peak state. Facing his peak sword strike, it could be said that both of them were injured. Li Tianlan could still fight. So could Wang Xingxiao. But at this moment Wang Xingxiao had Gu Hanshan, Jiang Shangyu, and dozens of elite soldiers from the two academies by his side. No matter how strong Li Tianlan was, how could he win when he was seriously injured? Chapter 379. Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan looked in the direction of the warehouse at the same time. The warehouse was very large. The sunlight cast a large shadow around the warehouse. In their sight, there was a huge hole with a diameter of nearly 10 meters in the thick wall. There were dense cracks around the hole, which was the trace of Li Tianlan's body crashing into the warehouse. Wang Xingxiao moved his body. When he was about to speak, he spat out another mouthful of blood. His body trembled slightly as if he was suffering great pain. He injured Li Tianlan with the Heaven Punishment Sword, but Li Tianlan's sword intent in his body also detonated the injury of trying to practice the half-reincarnation for several days in meditation. Wang Xingxiao's aura suddenly became weak. Wang Xingxiao felt a little regretful. He felt that he had really overestimated Li Tianlan, or underestimated Gu Qianchuan. Even the last invincible realm expert on the holy list was still an invincible realm expert. It should be no problem for him to suppress Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan destroyed one of Gu Qianchuan's arms. How good could he be? Wang Xingxiao decided to practice the half-reincarnation in the last few days of the maneuver because Li Tianlan's extreme strength disturbed his mind and made him instinctively ignore the price Li Tianlan had to pay to do all that. Now it seemed that the price Li Tianlan paid for destroying one of Gu Qianchuan's arms was more serious than everyone thought. The treasured cloud silk robe was damaged. Li Tianlan himself was also seriously injured. At this moment Wang Xingxiao suddenly questioned himself. If he hadn't practiced the half-reincarnation a few days ago, he wouldn't have participated in the maneuver with serious injuries. In this way the Heaven Punishment Sword just now would have been more powerful. Would a stronger sword directly take Li Tianlan's life and decide the result of the maneuver without Jiang Shangyu and Gu Hanshan's intervention? Wang Xingxiao raised his arm and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He was injured and couldn't exert all his strength. He was seriously injured by my sword just now. Now he is no longer a threat. Wang Xingxiao said calmly. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City united and turned the triennial event in Zhongzhou State into an undisguised murder. At this point, no one had a reason to retreat. The firmament in Wang Xingxiao's hand suddenly shook. He looked at the broken hole in the warehouse wall and said in a calm but firm tone, "So, let's end this quickly." The firmament was dragged on the ground. Wang Xingxiao held the hilt and rushed forward. The heavy sword's edge rubbed against the ground violently, causing sparks to fly. The sparks then turned into flames. It turned into raging fire and finally into lightning. Wang Xingxiao's speed was getting faster and faster. He was sprinting with all his strength. The firmament sword rushed out of the forest into the flat ground and rushed to the warehouse. Wherever the huge blade passed, it left a huge ravine that was hundreds of meters long. The lightning was like water wrapping Wang Xingxiao up. The waves surged up and down. Extreme softness. Unyielding. Gu Hanshan followed closely beside Wang Xingxiao. Compared with Wang Xingxiao, whose sword was only violent and fierce, his momentum was grander and more gorgeous. One sword wheel after another spun crazily around him. Hundreds of sword shadows whizzed up and down around him. Dark blue lightning spread around Gu Hanshan. Gu Hanshan rushed forward, but his feet did not move. His whole body seemed to be stepping on a huge sword shadow. As he rode on the sword, countless sword shadows bloomed around him like a blooming flower. The flower kept blooming and the lightning kept expanding, but Gu Hanshan was surrounded by darkness. It was the 9th secluded impasse in the 8th Supreme Sword Dance. Wang Xingxiao said to end this quickly. Gu Hanshan had no objection at all. He used his strongest sword at the beginning. The focus of the cooperation between the 3000 World and the Phantom Palace was Li Tianlan. Now, if the young forces owned by several of them combined, except for the credits deducted from the combination of forces, it was almost the same as the credits of the East Emperor Palace. Once Li Tianlan died, several young forces would merge and completely block all the paths of the East Emperor Palace, which could be regarded as cutting off the last hope of the Li family. But it was also crucial whether the merged forces were led by Kunlun City or the Wang family of Beihai. The ownership of dominance also depended on the result of this maneuver. Once Li Tianlan died, the competition between the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City would come next. In this way it would be more like the final team maneuver. Gu Hanshan was clear about this, but at this time he spared no effort and did not intend to take advantage of Wang Xingxiao at all. This time, the two sides joined hands to deal with Li Tianlan, which meant that they had bet on the future reputation of Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. On such an occasion, competition was competition. There was no calculation or conspiracy. The two rushed all the way forward. In the woods, a large number of elites brought by Gu Hanshan had begun to form a formation. The sword formation of Kunlun City was not as extremely overbearing as the Heaven Punishment sword formation, but it was more complicated and delicate. This sword formation did not need an absolutely strong core, but a balance in all aspects. Therefore there were more people in this sword formation, and its momentum was more terrifying. This formation might not be able to punish the sky, but it was enough to kill. The final hit formation. Boom. Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan were extremely fast. However, there was someone faster than the two of them, and the distance between them was also shorter. When the two had just rushed half the distance, a roar suddenly sounded on the side of the teaching building near the warehouse. A huge force surged in the teaching building and directly collapsed one side of the building. The dazzling and dangerous lightning surged in the collapsed building. Jiang Shangyu's figure rushed out of the teaching building and directly smashed into the warehouse. His figure stretched to the extreme in the sky, and tens of thousands of thunderbolts burst out with him as the center. Jiang Shangyu's expression was dignified and solemn. He had no sword in his hand. Looking at the warehouse that was getting closer and closer, he directly raised his fist. This was a unique skill that belonged to his family. Thousands of miles of rivers and mountains. The lightning was mighty, and Jiang Shangyu's figure fell at the same time. Jiang Shangyu did not hold back at all. He and Li Tianlan had cooperation. But the premise of all cooperation was that Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu could survive this maneuver. In the whole Zhongzhou state and the world, countless people's eyes were focused on this maneuver area at this time, including the eyes of at least several invincible realm experts. Among them were Zhongzhou State Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong and Zhongzhou State's God of War Gu Xingyun. Jiang Shangyu punched at the closest distance. How could he hold back? How could he dare to hold back? The frenzied and violent thunderbolts rushed out of the teaching building and smashed the roof of the warehouse immediately. Jiang Shangyu's figure rushed into the warehouse. In an instant, all the thunderbolts around him completely burst out in the most ferocious way. The light with the meaning of destruction turned into a shock wave, sweeping the entire warehouse. The warehouse was full of chaotic and dangerous light. Jiang Shangyu punched out and the second punch condensed again. The martial arts of the Jiang family only had a pair of iron fists without sword intent. But in the countless thunderbolts scattered by his punch, he clearly noticed that there was a weak sword energy behind him. Jiang Shangyu's eyes hesitated, then he suddenly turned around and punched with all his strength again. Picturesque landscape. The violent fist wind raised crazy thunderbolts, and Jiang Shangyu's whole body was full of light. He saw Li Tianlan. But, in the twinkling of an eye, Jiang Shangyu's hair stood on end. The picturesque landscape had already been blasted out uncontrollably, with Jiang Shangyu's voice somewhat distorted because of extreme shock. You, bang. Similarly, a fist directly hit Jiang Shangyu's fist. Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan approached the warehouse almost at the same time. A hoarse and fearful roar suddenly came from the warehouse. The whole warehouse kept shaking and swaying under the extreme force. Countless cracks continued to spread on the warehouse's walls. As soon as Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan stepped into the warehouse, the power in the warehouse suddenly broke out. Boom! There seemed to be a wild thunder in the whole warehouse. The tall and heavy warehouse completely collapsed in an instant in everyone's sight. Huge stones and messy steel bars flew in all directions, and the whole warehouse directly disappeared from everyone's sight. Endless lightning surged out from the collapsed warehouse, bringing with it a blazing white flame that burned everything. Jiang Shangyu's figure was blasted into the teaching building at a speed faster than when he fell. Li Tianlan, whose eyes were red and covered in blood, was almost evil at this time. In the eyes of Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao, it seemed to be madness at the end of the road, but it was also extremely dangerous and silent. Li Tianlan's figure rushed into the teaching building after Jiang Shangyu. In the sky full of thunderbolts and flames, his body was like a scarlet shadow. Save him! Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao said at the same time. For both the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, the Jiang family in Beijiang was valuable enough to rope in. If they could get Jiang Shangyu's loyalty, even if they entered the peak of the divine list in the future, Jiang Shangyu would be their best right-hand man. Such a person was much more valuable than Qin Moshua. How could they not save him? Their figures flashed at the same time, broke through the diffusing flames and thunderbolts, and rushed into the teaching building. Li Tianlan was completely crazy. The thunderbolts and flames seemed to be completely integrated in his hands. He was covered in blood, but his whole body was full of blazing white light. The whole teaching building was shaking. In the space on the third floor, Li Tianlan madly chased after Jiang Shangyu, who was fleeing desperately. There was no word to describe the kind of madness and wildness that made people's scalps numb. Walls, tables and chairs, glass, blackboard, stairs. Everything was completely broken in Li Tianlan's attack. Nothing could stand between him and Jiang Shangyu for even a second. Jiang Shangyu desperately parried, sweeping his legs, elbows, knees and hooks. The flowing blazing white light burst out with Li Tianlan's every move, and the whole teaching building kept shaking in his attack. In this state, Li Tianlan simply ignored everything. Jiang Shangyu was already covered in blood, but he was pulled over and thrown out by Li Tianlan again and again. This was no longer a battle. It was a brutal killing. A naked brutal killing. The firmament sword was raised in an instant. Sweeping. The thunderbolts, which were like water light, suddenly became extremely fierce and violent. The light was everywhere and there was no fluctuation. A large light curtain swept toward Li Tianlan in an instant. The sword wheel around Gu Hanshan was fully released, and countless sword shadows extended to the limit. The pseudo-domain of the ninth secluded impasse directly shrouded Li Tianlan with Wang Xingxiao's thunderbolts. Li Tianlan seemed to have completely lost his mind. He suddenly turned around and directly gave up on Jiang Shangyu. With red eyes, he directly pounced on Gu Hanshan. In an instant, Li Tianlan was completely shrouded in the ninth secluded impasse. But ninth secluded impasse was not dark. Instead, there was white light everywhere. 21st blade as shatter of land. Shatter of land. Shatter of land. The completely violent sword energy rushed through the light curtain brought by the firmament sword and shattered the pseudo-domain of the ninth secluded impasse. Covered in blood, Li Tianlan almost instantly arrived in front of Gu Hanshan, who was the only one who was still in his peak state. Countless bloodstains flowed on his body. Li Tianlan suddenly grabbed Gu Hanshan's shoulders with both hands and pressed down. Boom! The ground on the third floor of the teaching building suddenly collapsed. Li Tianlan directly pressed Gu Hanshan into a classroom on the second floor. Gu Hanshan's face was livid, and the sword shadows kept flashing all over him. 7 unique flowing lights. Like a stream of flowing light, he directly rushed out of the classroom along the nearest distance. Bang! With a dull sound, Li Tianlan directly smashed the wall. Once again he grabbed Gu Hanshan's neck. With a messy sound, the young master of Kunlun City was smashed into another classroom in an extremely embarrassing manner. Countless attacks fell on Gu Hanshan like crazy. Just like when he chased after Jiang Shangyu, the classrooms were completely smashed one after another. Attack, attack, attack. White light lingered in every inch of space and kept bursting around Li Tianlan. Gu Hanshan, who was completely covered in dust, twisted his face and suddenly shouted angrily, "Get lost!" 5 elements annihilation. 5 sword intents that he had accumulated for a long time surrounded Li Tianlan and fell fiercely. Go to hell. With a ferocious face, Gu Hanshan broke out with all his strength. The 8th supreme sword move suddenly rotated and chopped around Li Tianlan. The 9th secluded impasse covered everything, and the 3 elements annihilation took shape in the darkness. A dense sword shadow rushed directly into the 9th secluded impasse along with the sword shadow. At the same time as the sword shadow rushed into the pseudo-domain, there was also a majestic thunderbolt. Jiang Shangyu and Wang Xingxiao appeared here at the same time. The moment Li Tianlan was shrouded in the pseudo-domain, they attacked mercilessly. Gu Hanshan's face was gloomy and cold. A dagger slowly slid down his cuff. The thunderbolt spread quickly on the blade of the broken sword. Pseudo-domain, sword shadow, thunderbolt. Everything kept exploding around Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan trembled violently all over. Gu Hanshan sneered, raised his hand and directly threw out the dagger in his hand. The thunderbolt of the dagger bloomed in the pseudo-domain. The ninth secluded impasse suddenly exploded. More blood sprinkled down in a mess of light and shadow. The crumbling teaching building was completely quiet. When the light dissipated, when the dust settled, everyone saw the final result of this sword strike. Li Tianlan, who was known as the heavenly son of Zhongzhou State, twitched all over. Under the siege of 3 people, Gu Hanshan's last sword pierced through his abdomen. The dagger drove his body and nailed him to the wall. There was an uproar in the number 3 stand. No one was surprised. Almost all of them only had doubts on their faces. There was some commotion in the 40,000 troops. But Dongqing Wudi was still expressionless. An old patriarch of a wealthy and powerful family in the southeast slowly walked to the front of the stand and sat down. He said with a smile, "Little Han, I heard that you invested a lot of money in the East Emperor Palace?" "Yes, a lot." Han Donglu, the founder of the Flourishing Age Fund, sat in the same row as Wang Tianzong and others and smiled gently. The old patriarch sneered, looking at the financial tycoon who almost suffocated him in his own base camp, and said sarcastically, "You also have a time when your investment fails? That's rare. I have investments in the 3000 world and phantom world. I will earn them back." Han Donglu was calm and collected. "But you supported Li Tianlan. That means you offended His Majesty Sword Emperor and Gu Xingyun." The old patriarch patted Han Donglu on the shoulder and said meaningfully, "When Li Tianlan dies, you won't get anything from the layout of the special warfare system for the next few decades. The money you invested in the East Emperor Palace will be wasted." "What if Li Tianlan doesn't die?" Han Donglu asked indifferently. The old patriarch subconsciously glanced at Li Tianlan, who was nailed to the wall, and said disdainfully, "Is it possible? If Tianzong and Xingyun are as narrow-minded as you, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City don't need to develop. My investment in the East Emperor Palace is a normal investment. If I fail, I will lose a little. If he really wins, it will be a big profit." Han Donglu's tone was indifferent. "When?" The old patriarch sneered. "How can that boy win?" Han Donglu looked at Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun, who were a few seats away. In his sight, Gu Xingyun's face became more and more gloomy. But the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State had closed his eyes. Han Donglu glanced at the old patriarch and gently raised the corner of his mouth. "Ah. Those who think Tianlan is a little weak, don't worry." Chapter 380. No one could have imagined such a scene. Before the maneuver began, no one, including Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanshan, and Jiang Shangyu, expected that Li Tianlan, who was already the strongest of the young generation in Zhongzhou State, would be nailed to the wall by a sword. They never underestimated their strength, especially Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. One had wind and thunder veins, and the other had heavenly king heart. They had the best physical quality, the most perfect training breakthrough, and the most powerful inheritance. All of these could make them break out the combat capability far beyond the same realm. Both of them were at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but they were already qualified to look down on a considerable number of superiors of the half-step invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu's reputation was not as good as the first two, but in everyone's mind he was not a weakling either. He had been in the half-step thunder-shocking realm for 3 years and broke through to the stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm, which was enough to show that his potential was equally strong. If the 3 of them joined forces, they could even fight against Li Tianlan, who had the combat capability of the invincible realm. Furthermore, they had also prepared 2 sword formations that were equally powerful. All of this was well prepared, which showed the absolute importance they attached to Li Tianlan. In this maneuver, both Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao were ready to pay a great price, and they were even ready to stagnate in their martial arts realm for a few years. Li Tianlan was extremely powerful. They weren't weak either. Comparing the strength of both sides, they had at least a 50 to 60% chance of winning. This was enough for them to make up their minds to participate in this exercise. But they didn't expect everything to go so smoothly. Without the protection of the cloud silk robe, Li Tianlan was not at his peak. In this state, Li Tianlan still caused them a lot of losses and troubles in all the victories. But compared with their expectations, such losses and troubles were much smaller. Wang Xingxiao was seriously injured. Both Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu had internal injuries of varying degrees. But Li Tianlan was nailed to the wall by Gu Hanshan's sword. All the tables and chairs in the classroom had been completely smashed, and the walls had collapsed, bringing up a large amount of dust. Dust fell and rose again. Countless ashes fell on Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood. The short sword thrown by Gu Hanshan was still shaking. Li Tianlan's body seemed to be suffering great pain, twitching slightly with the vibration of the dagger. Dust and blood covered his body. Li Tianlan was very dirty and looked extremely embarrassed. This was the Li family's last hope. They were the enemies most likely to threaten the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City in the next few decades. He was the heavenly son of Zhongzhou State. But now the prodigy was nailed to the wall, covered in dirt and dust. He looked so pitiful, so petty, so weak. Wang Xingxiao remained calm. Jiang Shangyu remained calm. Gu Hanshan's expression was calm, but there was a kind of undisguised cruelty and coldness in his eyes. The combat capability of the invincible realm at the age of 22. This was the biggest shadow that shrouded their hearts, and it almost made them despair. But now, the shadow that made them feel the most despair was pinned in front of them, heavily injured and on the verge of death. The shadow in his heart was gradually fading. The three of them seemed to have become purer and purer. Vaguely, Wang Xingxiao saw his way to the half-step invincible realm. Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu also gained something. Thank you. Wang Xingxiao broke the silence. He looked at Li Tianlan and said in a simple and calm tone. He looked at Li Tianlan. This was the young man of the same generation that he admired and even respected the most. They won the exercise. But Wang Xingxiao didn't feel happy. He felt a little regretful. But he would not regret it. Li Tianlan might not have died here. But Wang Xingxiao knew that he had no choice. His hands and shoulders shouldered not only the firmament, but also the Wang family of Beihai. In the months to come, he would have to experience too many involuntary and unwilling situations. But he would no longer have a choice. Li Tianlan's eyes gradually dimmed. Wang Xingxiao looked at him silently. He wanted to say a lot, but he didn't want to say anything. At this moment, it seemed that whatever he said would be a mockery. But there was only respect in Wang Xingxiao's heart. He looked at him quietly and his eyes were a little bleak. It's all thanks to you that I can gain something today. Gu Hanshan looked at Li Tianlan. The cruelty and coldness in his eyes gradually turned into a somewhat twisted smile. Go in peace. He said, Zhongzhou State will have me and the Gu family in the future. We don't need the glory of the Li family. The corners of his mouth couldn't help curling up, and his killing intent was awe-inspiring. It seemed that everyone had forgotten. The young man who was nailed to the wall by him was the 9th on the world divine list. This ranking might be exaggerated, but Li Tianlan's name had always been on the divine list. Today he nailed an expert on the divine list to the wall. Gu Hanshan's eyes were a little ferocious. He glanced at Wang Xingxiao and then at Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu shrugged and didn't speak. I'll do it. Gu Hanshan's eyes fell on Wang Xingxiao again. His meaning was clear. He wanted to send Li Tianlan to hell in person. Whatever. Wang Xingxiao was a little dispirited. Gu Hanshan walked over slowly. Li Tianlan's eyes grew dimmer. The scarlet in his eyes gradually faded, and his black eyeballs gradually expanded. After the scarlet color disappeared, Li Tianlan's eyes instantly became dark and no white could be seen. In Gu Hanshan's perception, Li Tianlan's vitality was rapidly fading. But a sword intent suddenly rose in the classroom. He suddenly reached out and held the dagger nailed to him. His eyes were still dim. His life was still passing. His aura was still weakening. All the glory and hope of the Li family seemed to have completely gone to the bottom after a short period of madness. Li Tianlan directly pulled out the dagger. Blood gushed out. His body fell to the ground. The moment his aura was extremely weak, the sword intent that suddenly rose in the classroom suddenly became extremely violent. Watch out! Jiang Shangyu and Wang Xingxiao's faces changed dramatically, and they roared in unison. Without any hesitation, the two of them directly took action. Li Tianlan held the dagger and stood up straight. His eyes were pitch black with an indescribable silence and darkness. All his vitality seemed to be transformed into the most violent sword intent by him in the blink of an eye. The blazing white flame and the wild thunder surged without warning with Li Tianlan as the center. The sword intent swept through the air. The whole space twisted violently. A storm suddenly rose in the whole teaching building, overturning the mess in the classroom and lifting the ceiling. The blazing white fire raged wildly in the wind in an instant, but the lightning suddenly condensed in one place. Li Tianlan raised the dagger. The blazing white lightning kept jumping around the dagger, and then instantly turned into the most dazzling blue. Everything happened too fast. Li Tianlan just raised the dagger. The sword energy seemed to reach its peak directly without any short accumulation. The shining blue lightning was completely filled by the sword energy, and it continued to expand in the blazing white fire. The sword energy was mighty. It was not sharp, not sinister. There was only an irresistible strength and majesty. The Wang family of Beihai, sword of Emperor Path. The fire was like a raging wave. The lightning entwined with the sword energy followed the fire closely and almost instantly rushed to Gu Hanshan. Gu Hanshan's reaction was not slow at all. Li Tianlan had begun to retreat as soon as he raised the dagger in his hand. A large expanse of sword light wandered around him, and sword wheels rose up and surrounded Gu Hanshan. This was pure defense and retreat. The condensed sword of Emperor Path suddenly exploded in the thunder and fire. Gu Hanshan, who retreated in a hurry, and Wang Xingxiao and Jiang Shangyu, who acted in a hurry, were directly shrouded by the sword intent. The storm that arose out of nowhere raged fiercely. The sword light of Sword of Emperor Path shone more brightly, and the sword light was surging, crazily suppressing Wang Xingxiao and the other two who were in a passive position. Boom! The teaching building shook completely, and dense cracks almost covered the entire staircase. The sword intent of Sword of Emperor Path broke out, directly smashing Wang Xingxiao and the other two from the second floor to the first floor. Li Tianlan's pitch-black pupils were completely on fire. His eyes were dim, but the crazy scarlet once again covered his eyes. His pupils had completely turned into a daunting dark red. The sword energy had not yet dissipated. At the same second when Wang Xingxiao and the other two fell, Li Tianlan rushed down without hesitation. In front of stand number 3. On the huge screen the picture suddenly froze for a moment. Li Tianlan and the other two completely disappeared from the picture. Only the cracked wall appeared on the screen. The wall was snow white. Only a sword mark was carved there. When a considerable number of people were a little confused, Song Ci, who did not appear in the stand but stood in another corner and looked at the big screen, suddenly looked extremely gloomy. She held the long sword in her hand tightly. After hesitating for a moment, the woman who had already given up rushed to the maneuver area without hesitation. The picture on the big screen froze for 5 seconds. Then it became light that filled the whole screen. Chaos. The whole screen seemed to be shaking in the loud roar. The blazing fire, the violent thunder, the bone-chilling ice, the messy storm, and the pervading smoke and dust merged into an extremely chaotic light and shadow. Light and shadow covered everyone's sight. Indistinctly, a few blurry shadows entangled with each other in the extremely chaotic light. Crazy. Everyone was fighting crazily. Wherever the 4 figures passed by, there was destruction everywhere. It was destruction, it was killing, and it was a fight to the death. Sword chi, iron fists, all the unique skills and all the martial arts had become the most lethal killing moves. The figures on the screen kept moving and the cameras dimmed one after another. However, the whole battlefield became more and more desperate. The light and shadow gradually dimmed. But the sword energy became more and more violent. The majestic sword completely tore the space and all the pictures became blurred. Vaguely, a figure covered in blood was attacking the 3 opponents in front of him without any regard for anything else. There was no reason, no thought. Only fighting. That was giving up all the violence with hysterical killing intent. There was no defense, only attack. The dagger of Kunlun City returned to Gu Hanshan's hand. The heavy iron fist. The cold dagger. The huge blade fell on Li Tianlan again and again and blood kept falling. Li Tianlan didn't dodge at all and took all the opponent's counterattack head-on. Crazy attack. Howl continued to attack madly. The dagger stabbed into Li Tianlan's body several times. The iron fist hit Li Tianlan's body countless times. The heavy blade of firmament whistled wildly and chopped toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan didn't care at all, no matter how serious the injury was. Fighting and attacking had become his instinct. He wouldn't stop until he died. In the blurred picture, several people fought from the first floor to the top, and from the top to the bottom. In the suffocating silence, both sides kept bleeding. Li Tianlan's injury was getting worse, but his combat capability didn't decrease at all. Everyone was staring at the picture on the screen, staring at the outcome that might be decided at any second. The heavy sword of firmament rose again with a violent trajectory, and the whole space trembled with the blade. Wang Xingxiao completely changed. He seemed to become as crazy as Li Tianlan. The majestic sword energy wrapped the huge sword, and he chopped toward Li Tianlan again and again. Li Tianlan didn't dodge. The wonderful body movements and the mysterious shadow formula had all disappeared from his body. Only the 24 moves of swordsmanship remained. In the face of the 3 strongest young experts in Zhongzhou state except for himself, he had the attitude that he would fight to the end even if he died. Kill, kill, kill? Wang Xingxiao's eyes suddenly became extremely frenzied. The heavy and huge sword edge suddenly raised a sword intent that ignored everything. He held the giant sword with both hands, disregarding his own injury, and chopped down with all his strength. The Wang family of Beihai, the domineering sword. It was pure domineering, conceited, and disdainful of everything. The sword intent didn't fluctuate at all. The moment it appeared, it became completely crazy. Boom. The teaching building, which had stood here for many years, finally exploded into pieces under the raging sword chi. This was the most thorough collapse. First, the foundation of the first floor was completely loose. The stone pillars supporting the stairs were shattered. Countless boulders flew out and collapsed from the bottom to the top. The second floor, the third floor. In the smoke and dust all over the sky, the whole teaching building collapsed layer by layer in the raging sword intent. The almost overwhelming ruins smashed down, as if to completely bury the 4 people inside. Li Qianlan's attack instinctively paused. Ninth secluded impasse. The moment the smoke and dust rose, Jiang Shangyu, whose face was pale, suddenly roared at the top of his voice. Gu Hanshan froze for a moment, and then understood that this was Jiang Shangyu's reminder to him. Without any hesitation, Gu Hanshan unreservedly opened the pseudo-domain that he could barely master now, covering his 2 teammates and Li Tianlan. The sound of collapse seemed to go far away at the moment when the pseudo-domain was opened. Jiang Shangyu was in the air, and his whole body was completely stretched out in the darkness. His arms, legs, and waist. All the power was fully mobilized by him in the shortest time. The dense sounds of joints cracking kept ringing in Jiang Shangyu's body. Jiang Shangyu's body began to glow. The light was not dazzling, nor was it blue. It was extremely faint but absolutely distant. Jiang Shangyu raised his arm. His movements were extremely clear, but they were extremely fast. The sound of all the joints was still ringing in his body, and his punch had directly blasted down without reservation. This was the iron fist of the Jiang family. But it had surpassed the unique skill of the Jiang family. He had been in the half-step thundershocking realm for 3 years. Jiang Shangyu's martial arts did not move. He seemed to have done nothing, but he had done too much and gained too much. This punch was the strongest move that concentrated all of Jiang Shangyu's essence, chi, and spirit. His own killing move. 10,000 miles of starry sky. The wind of the fist carried an invisible power, vast and mighty. The faint light kept spreading along the trajectory of his attack, and instantly lit up the entire pseudo-domain. The dark pseudo-domain was not in the dark. The sky was full of stars. At this moment, it was not only the number 3 stand that caused a sensation. All over Zhongzhou state and even all the major forces in the world, all the people who saw this scene were suddenly shocked. In this maneuver, they finally saw what they wanted to see. Maybe this was not what they wanted to see the most, but it was definitely the most valuable. Jiang Shangyu's punch alone made countless people feel that this trip was worthwhile. Because this was Jiang Shangyu's own martial arts. It was completely his own martial arts which was most suitable for him. When Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan were exploring their own road to the invincible realm with the help of the top inheritance. Without the top inheritance, Jiang Shangyu had been dormant for 3 years, and finally embarked on the most suitable and correct path for him. Few people knew that he actually had the Heavenly King heart. But so what if they didn't know? At this moment, Jiang Shangyu was a real young heavenly son. Because he had his own path. As long as he kept going, the end of this path would definitely be the invincible realm. Wang Xingxiao had the wind and thunder veins. Gu Hanshan had the heavenly king heart. As long as they grew up, they would definitely enter the invincible realm in the future. And now Jiang Shangyu was the same. The starry sky. This punch was heavy and grand, and of course, it was as vast and amazing as the starry sky. The wind of the fist rushed into the pseudo-domain with great power. The stars lit up one after another. In silence, a huge sword edge lit up in the pseudo-domain. It was the purest light. There was only one point, but it was as vast as the sun and the moon. The point of light lay between the darkness and the stars, floating forward. It was so natural, so clear, but so dreamy and solemn. Heavenly sword. It was not the heavenly sword of the Wang family of Beihai. It was the heavenly sword that belonged to Wang Xingxiao himself. He also found his own path. Although it was only a starting point, it also broke the inherent inheritance of the Wang family of Beihai. It was the most dreamy and dazzling light. It was solemn, vast, and unparalleled. Ninth secluded impasse. The starry sky. Heavenly sword. At the moment when the teaching building collapsed, the three young heavenly sons made their most powerful attacks and their strongest trump cards at the same time. And the target was Li Tianlan. The wind of the fist was mighty all the way. The stars kept shining. Every ray of starlight was a bolt of lightning. Thousands of thunderbolts bloomed at the same time. And the sacred and solemn sword light of the heavenly sword suddenly spread. The pseudo-domain of the ninth secluded impasse began to twist wildly. There was no amazing destructive power. There was no huge momentum. Everything was silent. But the twisted ninth secluded impasse became darker and quieter. In the absolute silence, there were swords and starlight in the pseudo-domain. This was the real domain. The real domain of the invincible realm. The joint attack of the three finally broke through the limit of the thundershocking realm and went straight into the invincible realm, forming the most authentic domain of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan was wrapped in the domain of the invincible realm. He was motionless. He let the starlight fall on him. He let the edge of the heavenly sword pass through his chest. He let the ninth secluded impasse twist and squeeze his body. Bang! His arms were completely blown up in the frenzy of attacks. His arms disappeared. His legs were shattered. His whole body was completely torn into countless pieces. In front of the number 3 stand of the Sky Academy, the forces belonging to the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City had begun to cheer. Wang Tianzong opened his eyes and looked at Gu Xingyun for a moment. Both of them saw a touch of gloomy killing intent in each other's eyes. And near the two, Han Donglu, the founder of Huading Flourishing Age Fund, had taken out his mobile phone and dialed a number. "Help me draw up an investment contract." After the phone was connected, he said with a chuckle in the cheers. "Okay, Boss Han." On the phone, the staff of the Flourishing Age Fund answered, "What kind of investment is it? How much is it?" "The investment of the special warfare system." "The amount?" Han Donglu thought for a moment and said, 10 billion. This. Even with the scale of the Flourishing Age Fund, such a huge investment still made the staff on the other side hesitate for a while. But she did not express any objection and just said cautiously, "Okay, Boss Han, which institution is the investment in?" Han Donglu narrowed his eyes and gave his answer with a smile, "East Emperor Palace." Mount Dibbing. Emperor Hall. Qin Weibai and Summer Solstice sat opposite each other, like two perfect goddesses, holy, cold, and inviolable. The stack of documents was placed on the tea table between them. A screen was set up in the hall of Emperor Hall. Two perfect women, who were similar in some aspects but not exactly the same, looked at the screen quietly. On the screen was the live broadcast of the final maneuver of the Sky Academy. Qin Weibai watched Li Tianlan's body being completely torn into powder in the real invincible realm. Her eyes were bright and dreamy, and the corners of her mouth were gently raised. She was smiling. For the first time in many years, she smiled so brightly and so happily. That was a kind of undisguised ostentatiousness. She laughed out loud, and the crisp laughter kept echoing in Emperor Hall. "Is it funny?" Summer Solstice looked at Qin Weibai expressionlessly and said coldly, "This is the funniest thing I've ever seen." I giggle, "Oh, ha." Qin Weibai laughed and bent down. A killing intent flashed in Summer Solstice's eyes. But not to Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai seemed to feel Summer Solstice's killing intent. She paused and said with a smile, "Jealousy is the original sin. You are all guilty." "What about you?" Summer Solstice sneered and stared at Qin Weibai's eyes, showing her sharpness. "Me." Qin Weibai laughed at herself and said, "I am unforgivable." Federal City of Star State. The White House. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State, who had been visiting Star State in recent days, was also watching the maneuver. He saw the three young chosen ones attacking with all their might. He also saw the bodies of the real chosen ones being completely torn apart. President Li Huaqing, who had been tense the whole time, had a smile on his face and he seemed to be relieved. "It's over." He turned around and looked at a middle-aged man in a black suit beside him with a clear smile. The middle-aged man nodded and said, "President, when will you return home?" "I have to finish the work at hand." Li Huaqing smiled and said, "Tonight. We will return home overnight." South America. Indian Federation. In a luxurious manner comparable to the presidential mansion, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, Jiang Qinyin, who had the strength of the invincible realm but had civilized the dark world by stratagem, was also watching the final maneuver. Beside him stood a young man about 30 years old. The young man stared at the screen with a dignified look in his eyes. "I didn't expect him to go this far." Jiang Qinyan sighed softly. This man is determined and has become enemies with the Jiang family of South America. Are you sure you can kill him? The young man beside Jiang Qinyan was silent for a while, then slowly shook his head. It's hard, but I will try. Europe. Fog capital. In the ancient and huge castle complex, a pair of white brother and sister who could be said to be the most powerful in Europe, were also watching the final maneuver of Zhongzhou state. The man was tall and straight, handsome, meticulous, and had a pair of pure blue eyes that seemed to contain a peaceful wisdom and tranquility, in addition to the depth of his deep blue eyes. Compared with the man, the woman in the golden dress beside him was extremely languid. This was a woman who was powerful enough to make people not dare to guess her age by appearance alone. Mature, coquettish, seductive, and lazy. Yet, there was an invisible sharpness that could take one's soul away. She looked more like a mixed race with black hair and a slender figure. The most attractive thing was her eyes. They were the purest and most dazzling golden pupils, not pale gold but the purest gold, deep and quiet. She lay on the sofa and watched the maneuver quietly. Suddenly she chuckled and said, "Is this the little guy supported by Samsara Palace and the Lin clan? I'm afraid Tianzong is going to have a headache. No wonder he contacted me a few days ago to borrow the murderous weapon. I don't know if he wants to deal with this little guy or the Lin clan and Samsara Palace. Neither of them is easy to deal with." She spoke in perfect Chinese. "You want to lend it to her?" The man beside her raised his eyebrows, his voice gentle and calm. "I can't say no to that man." The woman giggled, not frivolous but enchanting. She suddenly thought of something. "Do we have a lot of cooperation with the Lin clan?" "I won't interfere with your decision. And you don't want to interfere with the family business. Business is business. I have a pleasant cooperation with the Lin clan." The man shook his head with a smile. "It's boring. I don't care about your business. Tianzong didn't ask me to do anything." The woman curled her rosy little mouth. "You and Tianzong?" The man hesitated a little and finally said, "We haven't contacted each other for many years, right? Or can't let it go?" "Why should I let it go?" the woman asked faintly. The man sighed softly and shook his head. "You have no chance. All Tianzong's attention is on summer solstice. You should have known that it would end like this. What chance do you have?" The woman frowned. "Summer solstice is also? Then you have no chance." The man's tone was firm. The woman suddenly sat up and screamed angrily, "William, you're meddling too much." She was neither ugly nor sweet when she was angry, only a kind of frightening majesty. "I'm your brother." William shrugged. "So is Wang Tianzong." "You're my brother." The woman laughed. "But Tianzong? Our grandfather's 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 father and Tianzong's ancestors were brothers. Their relationship is so far away that he is not my brother. I want him to be my man." William looked confused. The string of tongue-twister grandfather represented a distant enough blood relationship, but it also made him confused. "My Chinese is not very good." William smiled bitterly. "All right." The woman shrugged. "I mean, my business has nothing to do with you." William whistled. "Then you can lend him the murderous weapon, or you can go and help him in person. The murderous weapon is already on the way. As for me, I have my own business." The woman shook her head. "Have lunch with me at noon." "I have a guest at noon." William looked at his watch with some embarrassment. The woman raised her eyebrows. "I'm going to have lunch with the Queen." William looked helpless. The Queen. In the knowledge of most Englishmen, there was naturally only one Queen. "I'm also the Queen, okay?" the woman said angrily. William laughed and said nothing more. The woman put on her high heels and turned directly. "I'm leaving." William waved his hand casually and did not get up to see her off. He just watched his sister leave. He did not lie. He did have lunch with the Queen of England at noon. But his sister did not lie either. She was indeed the Queen. One was the Queen of England. And she was the Queen of the entire Europe. The Queen of Shadows of the Shadow Throne, a super dark force in Europe. Grand Duke Irene King Tong Wang Rothschild. William thought of the murderous weapon that was about to reach the Wang family of Beihai, and his eyes refocused on the maneuver on the screen. What followed was destined to be a picture that some people wanted to see, but some people did not want to see. He thought of the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. He suddenly felt a little funny. In every corner of the world, people were paying attention to the maneuver of Zhongzhou State and Li Tianlan. Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanshan, and Jiang Shangyu were also watching Li Tianlan. The real invincible domain was constantly twisting. Li Tianlan's body was torn into pieces. After the strongest blow, The aura of the three people continued to weaken. But Gu Han, who controlled the ninth secluded impasse to tear Li Tianlan, was laughing. He laughed wildly and proudly. The old enemy who had been pressing on his heart since he appeared was dead. There would be no Li family in Zhongzhou State in the future. Only Kunlun City. How could he not laugh? The wild laughter became louder and sharper. Gu Hanshan's face was distorted, and he did not hide his laughter. Jiang Shangyu was silent. Wang Xingxiao was silent. He quietly watched Li Tianlan's body being torn apart little by little in his sight, and he suddenly felt a little melancholy and confused. Sizzle? A subtle sound suddenly fell into Wang Xingxiao's ears. Wang Xingxiao froze for a moment. Sizzle? The sound continued to ring, and it was extremely clear in Gu Hanshan's arrogant laughter. It was as if someone had used their hands to gently tear apart a piece of paper or a dry leaf. It was gentle yet cruel. Li Tianlan's body continued to shatter in the domain. But Wang Xingxiao suddenly raised his head and stared at Li Tianlan in the shattering. Gu Hanshan's laughter also disappeared. Jiang Shangyu also raised his head. In the sight of the three, Li Tianlan's body shattered faster and faster. But he was still calm and silent. Under this kind of shattering he had no pain, no sound, and no bloodstains. No bloodstains? Gu Han, whose face changed dramatically, took a step forward subconsciously. Snap! In the subtle sound, Li Tianlan's body disappeared completely. It was not a complete shattering disappearance. Instead, it suddenly disappeared in everyone's sight. The domain had completely dissipated. The sun shone down again. Wang Xingxiao stared at the place where Li Tianlan had stood. There was no bloodstain or body there. Under the sunlight, there was only a single leaf that was still green, but had all of its water content sucked out, drifting down lightly. The leaf carried a faint and negligible sword intent, which made people feel desperate. The three young heavenly sons couldn't say a word for a while. Their hearts were extremely cold. They didn't speak. But someone spoke. It was so quiet and indifferent. You three. The voice sounded softly behind them, leisurely and quiet. Did you have fun? Bang? Accompanying this sound was an incomparably deep and loud heartbeat. The three young heavenly sons of Zhongzhou State looked back in disbelief. On a tree not far away in their sight, Li Tianlan stood there quietly, holding a branch in his hand. There was no madness in his eyes, only tranquility. His clothes were neat and new, so clean that they seemed to have never been touched. Unscathed. Wang Xingxiao opened his mouth, and a mouthful of blood gushed out of his throat. He choked and coughed. Li Tianlan didn't look at them. He just looked up at the sky quietly. In the dead silence on the number 3 stand, Li Tianlan's face was reflected on the big screen. Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun stared at that face in silence. Li Tianlan seemed to be looking at them. The sun shone down warm and hot, bright and clear. That was the sky in Li Tianlan's eyes. It was clear, but there were still shadows. Chapter 381. Li Tianlan looked at the sky. The three young chosen ones looked at Li Tianlan. This was a dead, stiff, almost frozen picture. Large tracts of jungle were broken into powder, and the flat ground became a pool in the raging sword intent. There was still dust rising from the ruins of the collapsed teaching buildings and warehouses. It was a blur. Li Tianlan stood quietly on the top of a tree, bathing in the sun and holding a branch. The green branch seemed to have lost a leaf, but the other leaves were still warm, with the water stains left by the night rain and morning dew. They were very clean. The branch and the person were very clean. The fierce battle that affected everyone's mind and the eyes of the world seemed to have come to an end, but it also seemed to have just begun. He held the branch and stood casually on the top of the tree. It was clean and fresh, as if he was taking a walk in this battlefield. He looked at the sky. The three chosen ones, covered in dust and blood, looked at him. There was no anger, sorrow, or self-mockery in the silent and frozen picture. All the emotions seemed to be completely frozen with the blood. There was only dullness left. He stood at the peak of power, looked down on them, broke the rules, lost friendship, and did whatever it took to eliminate the threat in the future. In the end, he risked his life and was injured. When he should have been completely relaxed, he found that he just destroyed a fallen leaf, a sword intent, and an incarnation that the other party threw into the sky. What was his mood? Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Tianlan with a complicated expression. He was not unfamiliar with such a method, but he was absolutely not familiar with it. Li Tianlan, who was destroyed by them together, was not an incarnation. It was sword intent. It was the purest sword intent that belonged to Li Tianlan. The sword intent had been in their sight all the time. The sword intent did not deceive their eyes, but the pure sword intent twisted the void. The sword intent finally twisted into Li Tianlan's appearance in the void. It was an extremely powerful and pure sword intent. What the three of them saw was all an illusion after the distortion of the void. In fact, it was a fallen leaf and a sword intent. It was like a magic trick. A magic trick that only those at the peak of the invincible realm were qualified to play. Li Tianlan's combat capability was naturally no match for those at the peak of the invincible realm. But his vision, his knowledge, his thoughts, and even his will were close to the most mysterious and powerful domain. Wang Xingxiao's path was just a prototype. Jiang Shangyu's road had just begun. But the road in front of Li Tianlan had already led to the highest place. He was standing on that path moving forward. All of Jiang Shangyu's complacency completely disappeared. Looking at Li Tianlan in front of him, his dull eyes became dim and even a little desperate. Gu Hanshan trembled all over. His trembling was extremely obvious, as if he was convulsing. He used all the strength in his body to hold the dagger that he had used to stare at the fallen leaf not long ago. The blade of the dagger trembled along with his arm, cutting through the air. His face was completely twisted. After a moment of sluggishness, his heart was filled with astonishment, disbelief and disbelief. In the end it turned into a burning jealousy. How could the remaining member of the Li family, an ant, have come this far? What did he rely on to reach this step? The vision of the peak invincible realm and the combat capability of the invincible realm. Why wasn't he the one who could do this? Who was Li Tianlan? What right does he have? Gu Hanshan gritted his teeth and stared at Li Tianlan, who was unscathed. Thinking of the fierce battle just now, he suddenly felt that everything about him was a joke. His eyes became sinister with jealousy, and finally turned into a surging killing intent and a little timid resentment. Puff. Wang Xingxiao spat out a mouthful of blood again. His eyes were already a little dizzy and blurred. But his will became more and more sober. The scenes of the battle just now replayed in his mind, and every scene seemed to be a merciless mockery of them. He didn't understand why Li Tianlan was so crazy, nor did he understand why the branch in his hand disappeared under Qin Mashua's sky-killing sword intent, nor did he understand why Li Tianlan had no sense at all. It turned out that the truth of everything was just because it was just a sword intent condensed by a fallen leaf. No matter how pure the sword intent was sword intent. Without life, it naturally had no thoughts and reason. The three young chosen ones of Zhongzhou State joined hands to fight against a fallen leaf. It was thrilling and soul-stirring, and they finally won. A fallen leaf. Such a beautiful story might have already spread all over the dark world, right? Wang Xingxiao raised the corner of his mouth. He laughed. The chosen one of Beihai, who was destined to shoulder the Wang family of Beihai for the next few decades, trembled with laughter. His laughter was inexplicable and full of self-mockery. But he was not disappointed. Not at all. When Jiang Shangyu was a little desperate, and when Gu Hanshan was full of jealousy, the helplessness and melancholy in Wang Xingxiao's eyes completely disappeared with the appearance of Li Tianlan. Flames flashed in his eyes, and eventually became a wildfire that burned everything. He, who was the most seriously injured, was the first to raise the firmament in his hand. The huge blade pointed at Li Tianlan from afar, and the fighting intent soared. At this moment there was no timidity, jealousy, or loss in Wang Xingxiao's eyes, only firmness and madness. Li Tianlan withdrew his gaze from the sky and looked at Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao stood straight, holding the sword, and his figure was as straight as a javelin. I lost today. Wang Xingxiao's eyes became more and more frenzied. But his tone was calm and a little humble. I'm sincerely convinced. He took a step forward with his sword, looked at Li Tianlan and whispered, but the maneuver is not over. If you don't die today, I'm willing to chase after your back for many years to come. There was a flash of light in Li Tianlan's eyes. Wang Xingxiao's figure was reflected in his quiet and deep pupils, so clear. This was Wang Xingxiao. He lost the maneuver, became a laughing stock and was seriously injured. But compared to Gu Hanshan, who completely lost his composure, and Jiang Shangyu, who was in a mess, the chosen one of Beihai did not lose the bearing of the Wang family of Beihai after all. He still dared to fight and draw his sword. In the stands, Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually became calm. He looked at Wang Xingxiao's firm and crazy eyes on the screen, and the corners of his mouth lifted imperceptibly. He had expected this situation. In Lin he had already vaguely perceived the height of Li Tianlan's martial arts. But before the maneuver began, he really did not expect that there was such a means to dominate the battlefield with a green leaf. That was the domain belonging to the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan's technique was very jerky and there were too many loopholes. In the eyes of any invincible realm expert or even a half-step invincible realm expert, such a technique was ridiculous. But it also meant that Li Tianlan had found the way to the peak. A green leaf fought with 3 young chosen ones. Such an ending could be described as extremely miserable. But in his eyes, his son didn't lose in a bad way. At least, he did not lose his faith, and he still had the fighting desire in his heart. Martial arts was like climbing a mountain, crossing the sea and ascending to the sky. Who could sing all the way? Failure was actually not terrible. It actually took more courage to admit failure and be willing to chase after the opponent's back. Wang Tianzong's palm stroked the famous sword. Listened to the sea beside him. His eyes gradually changed from calm to cold. It became cold. Li Tianlan stood on the treetop and slowly turned around. His movements were slow, but his every move affected everyone's nerves. His eyes swept over the sword in Wang Xingxiao's hand, ignored the sword energy on the blade and finally stopped on Gu Hanshan. Gu Hanshan's expression was still distorted, and he even forgot to hide the jealousy deep in his eyes. Do you like to laugh? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and took the initiative to ask, so humorous? Gu Hanshan froze for a moment, and his face turned purple in an instant. He recalled his wild and carefree laughter as he tore that green leaf apart. That was simply the most humiliating moment of his life. What did you say? Gu Hanshan flew into a rage. Li Tianlan's eyes were still calm and his tone was indifferent. Such a temperament is really a disgrace to the heavenly king heart. It also insults the 4 words of the young chosen ones. Kunlun City? It was impossible for his voice to reach the stands. But it easily fell into the ears of everyone present. Gu Hanshan, who was in a mess, suddenly had red eyes. That was not the unyielding fighting desire like Wang Xingxiao's. Instead, it was a kind of anger because his scar had been opened. He instinctively took a step forward but then stopped where he was. Kunlun City, get into formation. His face was completely red, but he did not dare to do it himself. Instead he roared. Everyone who participated in the maneuver had arrived at the scene. The sword energy in the final hit formation that Kunlun City had prepared for a long time was mighty. This was a sword formation without a so-called core. But without a core, it did not mean that there could not be a core when conditions permitted. Gu Yulan, the personal disciple of Gu Qianchuan and the founder of Jilei Peak, was standing in the formation at this time. Gu Yulan, who had not fully recovered from her injury, was pale, but she bit her lip tightly and raised the sword in her hand. In an instant, the killing formation, which was formed by more than 50 elites, exploded with a majestic sword intent. Li Tianlan slightly raised his eyebrows. His figure trembled gently on the branch. Without a sound, his entire figure continued to fade, and finally disappeared under the bright and beautiful sunlight. The sword energy of the final hit sword formation was surging and becoming more and more majestic. Gu Hanshan suddenly turned around and glanced around. Behind you. Jiang Shangyu suddenly raised his voice. Gu Hanshan quickly turned around. There was only sunlight, only the pool, only the sword formation, only Wang Xingxiao and Jiang Shangyu in his sight. Behind you. A cold chill instantly swept through Gu Hanshan's whole body. He turned around again. The dense forest appeared in his sight, but Li Tianlan was still nowhere to be seen. A great danger seemed to be lurking behind him like a shadow, but he could not see anything. He was turning around. Still nothing. What are you looking for? When the voice sounded, a hand was placed on Gu Hanshan's shoulder at the same time. All the hair on Gu Hanshan's body stood on end. With a roar, the sword intent that had been accumulated all over his body instantly flew in all directions. But the hand on his shoulder was still stable. The palm slightly tightened. In the case of serious injury, a force that Gu Hanshan could not resist directly pressed on his shoulder. Gu Hanshan roared fiercely. Bang. His body directly knelt on the ground. Bang. In the dull sound, before Gu Hanshan had time to feel humiliated, a foot directly kicked him in the back of his heart. Red blood gushed out of his mouth like a fountain. Gu Hanshan's body directly flew dozens of meters away. Gu Hanshan endured the pain and climbed up as fast as he could. His eyes were cold and gloomy, there was nothing in his sight. Behind you. In the shrill reminder, Gu Hanshan reacted completely by instinct. He clenched the dagger and directly swept it backward. His body turned extremely fast, but he still did not see Li Tianlan. He only saw a hand. A hand clenched his arm and pulled it very gently. Ah ah ah. The severe pain made Gu Hanzhan roar suddenly. His physical strength was as fragile as a piece of paper in that hand. His arm was forcibly broken in the pull. The dagger in his hand fell out of control and was immediately caught by Li Tianlan. The blade flashed with cold light in the sun with a dark red color. Without the slightest hesitation, Li Tianlan stabbed the dagger into Gu Hanzhan's back steadily. Blood splashed. The dagger was stabbed in and then pulled out violently. Li Tianlan kicked Gu Hanzhan out again. Li Tianlan. In pain and shame, Gu Hanzhan's whole face and even his voice became distorted. At this moment he finally remembered a secret unique skill of the Li family. It was the legendary unique skill recorded in the Invincible Manual of Map of God of War. Night walking. This could be said to be the top but also the most difficult body movement to practice in the dark world. It was also an almost invincible unique skill. It was good at chasing and even better at close-range assassination. In the battle of the same realm, once night walking took the lead, the enemy could never see his position. Such a body movement seemed to take advantage of the blind spot and absolute speed. But in fact, night walking pursued instinct and the grasp of the details of the enemy's body. Instinct was the fastest. This was a kind of body movement that used instinct to always keep pace with the enemy's movements. When practiced to the peak, once he appeared behind the enemy in the battle, he would always be behind the enemy until the enemy died. Gu Hanzhan had the Heavenly King heart. At his peak, his will was absolutely focused. Could be said that he was the biggest nemesis of night walking. But now his mind was in a mess. Under Li Tianlan's attack he had no power to fight back. Using the body movement that was most restrained by the Heavenly King heart to tease Gu Hanzhan was the greatest humiliation to Kunlun City and Gu Hanzhan. The dagger pierced Gu Hanzhan's body. Gu Hanzhan endured the sharp pain, tried to contract the muscles in his waist, and controlled the blood from gushing out. Li Tianlan stood in the sun with the dagger in his hand. He smiled softly. "You've played enough. Now it's my turn." In the final maneuver that day the world should not only see his sword. They should also see the embarrassment of the other young heavenly sons in Zhongzhou state. There was still a lot of time. Li Tianlan only intended to play slowly. His eyes swept over Jiang Shangyu, Gu Hanzhan and Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao still maintained the posture of the giant sword. Li Tianlan's eyes swept over. He slowly closed his eyes. Li Tianlan's pupils constricted quietly. In his perception, the moment Wang Xingxiao closed his eyes, he was no longer alive. Under the sun he was like a statue of flesh and blood. His vitality was disappearing. But the sword energy around Wang Xingxiao was unprecedentedly violent. The sword energy kept rising. It surpassed the previous heaven-killing stroke and the heavenly sword in the domain of the three people's joint attack. He stood in silence and there was only peace in him. His heart was calm, his breathing was steady and his will was focused. Wang Xingxiao was completely immersed in the sword intent. Failure came first and honor came later. In life, there were always occasions when one could not take a step back even if he had to give everything. Li Tianlan ignored Wang Xingxiao. Killing people's hearts. He couldn't kill people. But if there was a chance to completely destroy their minds, Li Tianlan would not hesitate to do so. He held the branch in one hand and casually threw the dagger to Gu Hanzhan with the other, saying expressionlessly, "Continue." It was not Gu Hanzhan who continued. As Li Tianlan's voice fell, Jiang Shangyu rushed up without hesitation. The so-called cooperation and the so-called future completely disappeared from Jiang Shangyu's mind at this moment. His essence, qi and spirit were completely concentrated, his will was focused and his heart was pure. Li Tianlan said he would play slowly. But he did not want Li Tianlan to play slowly. In the entire Zhongzhou state, under the gaze of countless forces all over the world, Jiang Shangyu did not want Li Tianlan to press him to the ground and ravage him. He was not born in the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, which were the super forces at the peak of martial arts, and he did not have the top inheritance. But he had his pride. Thousands of miles of starry sky. With Jiang Shangyu as the center, the sunlight in the nearby space dimmed instantly. The starlight lit up in pieces. Jiang Shangyu's figure stepped over the land and leaped into the sky. The whole earth shook with a loud bang. The faint starlight suddenly burst out. The stars were bright. The starlight that occupied the whole space attracted each other and turned into thunderbolts. The thunderbolts gathered on Jiang Shangyu's arm. Under the dazzling light, a large amount of thunderbolts condensed into a fist that was tens of meters long. Jiang Shangyu roared wildly, clenched the fist made of thunderbolts and smashed it down hard. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm without any fluctuation. He looked at Jiang Shangyu, who was constantly accumulating power in the air. He watched the huge shadow of the huge fist that traversed tens of meters of space fall. The branch in his hand hung on the ground. He raised one hand. There was no starlight, no night, no thunderbolts, no sword energy. A sword was a sword. And a fist was a fist. His figure was extremely small under the shadow of the fist that was tens of meters long. But at this moment, Li Tianlan exuded a kind of momentum that could suppress everything. Under the shadow of the fist, he punched into the sky with the power of the sea. The air within a radius of 100 meters suddenly twisted along with his punch. The space exploded in the compression with a harsh sonic boom. The flickering but seemingly endless starlight was extinguished in an instant. The sun fell again. It shone on the shadow of the fist made of thunderbolts in the void. Li Tianlan's punch directly hit the shadow of the fist. Boom. In the dull crash, a large area of land between Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu continued to crack. The flat ground continued to rise and fall with the appearance of the cracks. Smoke and dust rose, filled the sky, and rushed into the woods like a gust of wind. Blood gushed out of Jiang Shangyu's mouth and his arm. His whole body trembled violently, and his aura fluctuated constantly. Li Tianlan didn't move. Under the collision of the two huge forces, his clothes and hair didn't even lift a little bit. Jiang Shangyu gritted his teeth. The violent power twisted the air. There seemed to be a thick wall in front of him blocking his way. The incredible destructive force pressed on his whole body. His bones began to tear and his muscles were completely deformed. In the space where he couldn't move an inch, he raised his other arm again. Another punch. Another vast starry sky. The starlight quietly lit up in the storm of power. Under the sun, the darkness came quietly. Gu Hanshan, who managed to calm down, followed Jiang Shangyu and attacked with all his strength. 9th Secluded Impasse. 8th Supreme Sword Dance. Extinction of 5 elements. 3 elements final kill. Gu Hanshan seemed to have become a sword energy ejector in an instant. The dense sword intent kept whistling out with the vibration of his body. A large number of sword wheels and whistling sword shadows all rushed into the pseudo-domain in an instant. They combined with the starry sky and assimilated with the darkness. The vast starry sky and the 9th Secluded Impasse blended with each other. But Wang Xingxiao's sword was missing. Wang Xingxiao still held his sword and closed his eyes. The sword chi gathered crazily and covered his entire body. The sword energy was getting stronger and stronger. A large area of space fluctuated around him, undulating like stormy waves. There seemed to be a sea in the air around Wang Xingxiao. The heavy sword firmament was lifted up little by little. It was extremely heavy. But he seemed to have forgotten everything around him. He didn't move or speak and he didn't draw his sword. It was Gu Yulan who drew her sword. It was the final kill sword formation composed of more than 50 elites whose realm was at the peak of the ice-condensing realm. In the domain the starlight lit up. On the edge of the woods, Gu Yulan, who had accumulated the sword intent of the final kill sword formation to the limit, suddenly let out an extremely high-pitched scream. The silver mask that she had always worn on her face directly exploded under the constantly gathering sword energy. Her long hair fluttered in the sword intent. In the whistling sword intent, everyone saw her line up. It was an extremely beautiful face, very seductive, but a little childish and cold. In the soaring sword intent, her figure went straight up into the sky, with the sword intent condensed by dozens of people and her own strongest blow. She held the sword with both hands and rushed straight to Li Tianlan. This sword seemed light, but it was extremely strange and fast. Gu Yulan's figure broke through the air. Her figure was like a goshawk. She held the sword with both hands, and the tip of the sword lit up with a blurry light. It was like thunder, flame, ice, flying snow and everything. All the light eventually became extremely fleeting. The light on the tip of the sword grew brighter and brighter. It seemed to be a sword that cut through the space. Wherever Gu Yulan passed, the whole space was fragmented and mottled, turning into a dark and undefeated color. She rushed into the pseudo-domain, into the darkness and starlight. Without hesitation. Behind Gu Yulan, more than 50 elites of the final kill sword formation fell to the ground. Dozens of remaining members of the 6 teams rushed to Li Tianlan at the same time. Everyone had used all their strength. The young heavenly sun, the majestic sword formation and the scattered elites. Charge, all of you, charge. Li Tianlan still stood where he was. The final kill sword formation made up for the heavenly sword. Everything seemed to begin to change toward the real domain again. Li Tianlan laughed. This domain tore apart one of his sword intent. Now that he was standing here, What was the meaning of this so-called domain? Gu Yulan stabbed directly at his chest with unparalleled sword light. Li Tianlan raised his palm again. He clenched his fist. He held the branch in his other hand. There was no sword intent. Just the palm. Just the power. But this time he really did his best. Crack. There was a clear sound of breaking in the silent pseudo-domain. Li Tianlan's palm didn't seem to be fast, but it just appeared in front of Gu Yulan. The starlight and the pseudo-domain were constantly torn apart the moment he raised his palm. The sword light shone on Li Tianlan's calm and deep pupils. His eyes were so quiet, so gentle, but so majestic. Gu Yulan's body froze in the air. With the sword intent of dozens of people and the strongest blow, she came to Li Tianlan and tried her best to scream and stab forward, but the long sword could no longer move forward. Li Tianlan pinched the blade with one hand. The violent sword energy hit the power storm in Li Tianlan's palm and kept trembling, but it couldn't move forward at all. The sword light, the starlight, the pseudo-domain, and the power storm. At this moment, all the destructive forces collapsed around Li Tianlan, whistling and flying. Under the flickering light, he stood quietly with his own general trend in peace. This was the picture he left to the world. But it was so desperate for the enemies who besieged him. Li Tianlan pinched the blade of Gu Yulan's sword and pulled it gently. He flicked his fingers. His fingers touched the edge of the sword, producing a crisp sound. The sword energy of the final hit sword formation was completely violent. The bright blade was completely broken in Li Tianlan's hands. The front end of the blade rushed to Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu with sharp sword energy and heavy power. Gu Yulan, holding the dagger, was swaying in the pseudo-domain. Li Tianlan's voice was very soft, but it was indescribably loud in the pseudo-domain. Goodbye. As he spoke, he closed his fingers. A punch. The broken pseudo-domain shattered in an instant. The power as vast as heaven and earth burst out under Li Tianlan's punch, like a mountain or a sea. The ground where Li Tianlan was completely collapsed. The pseudo-domain disappeared, the starlight disappeared, and the sword energy disappeared. There was no light between heaven and earth, only power. The heavy power completely blew away Gu Yulan, and at the same time dozens of idle elites who besieged him were blown away. On the big screen of the Sky Academy, Gu Yulan, who bore the brunt, was torn into powder by this punch. One figure after another flew back under the raging tide of power. The majestic power shook the sky and never stopped. Countless people and countless swords danced chaotically in the tyrannical power. They gathered in one place and rushed out of the collapsed ground, bringing with them a rain of blood that filled the sky as they charged into the forest. The members who formed the final hit sword formation in the woods were directly rolled up. Nearly 100 elites and nearly 100 swords tumbled powerlessly in the air and rushed to the depths of the woods for hundreds of meters. The incredible power swept all the way with people and swords. Countless trees in the entire forest collapsed and collapsed. Leaves and blood fluttered at the same time. In an instant, the entire dense forest was cleared out, leaving a straight passage of more than 200 meters long. Li Tianlan's figure floated in the air, expressionless. He was so quiet that he was almost nothingness. But under the sun, he floated quietly like an invincible devil in everyone's eyes. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Hanshan, who were forced back by a broken sword, trembled at the same time. They looked at the branch in Li Tianlan's hand. They looked at the pure punch. Their eyes clearly showed that they were on the verge of collapsing. Everyone stared at this incredible punch in a daze. Even Gu Xingyun's eyes were full of astonishment. How? His tone was a little difficult. How is it possible? He knew that Li Tianlan had wind and thunder veins. So in the battle between him and Gu Qianchuan said that Li Tianlan's power was incredible, but he didn't care. But this punch had gone beyond the scope of great power, at least beyond the scope of wind and thunder veins. Can wind and thunder veins do this? Gu Xingyun suddenly turned his head and looked at Wang Tianzong subconsciously. I can't. Wang Tianzong nodded. His son Wang Xingxiao also had wind and thunder veins. But even if his wind and thunder veins evolved to the highest level, it was difficult to do this with pure power. Wang Xingxiao's wind and thunder veins were difficult to achieve, whether it was strength or the speed that Li Tianlan approached Gu Hanshan. In his impression, there was only one person in the invincible realm who could do this with one punch. His disciple, Dijiang with double thunder veins. Li Tianlan also did this. What did this mean? His physique has improved. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and said faintly, "This is double wind and thunder veins." 2 chapters of about 8,000 words in a row. I want to ask for a monthly ticket. Ahem, brothers, please support me crazily. The word crazily support is really good. Chapter 382. Today's second big chapter, there will be a bigger one at noon. Don't miss it, it was impossible. This was the first reaction in Gu Xingyun's mind. There was no saying that physique determined everything in the dark world, but there were indeed a few special phenomena that were truly unique in practicing martial arts. Martial arts was the combination of body and will. The heavenly king heart was the easiest to temper the firmest will. The wind and thunder veins were the easiest to break through the limit in physical strength. This was the most precious congenital condition. Dual wind and thunder veins? Gu Xingyun had never thought of this concept, let alone heard of it. Tribulation with dual wind veins went further and further in the chi-controlling realm. He didn't enter the ice-condensing realm, the fire-flaming realm, or the thunder-shocking realm. Finally, when he was the closest to the invincible realm, he directly slaughtered the supreme ninja of East Island. That was the most awe-inspiring king of shadow on the killer list. Dijiang with dual thunder veins from the Wang family of Beihai had been in the world for less than 3 years, but he led the Tianan Freedom Corps and shocked the whole dark world countless times. Before Tribulation and Dijiang entered the invincible realm, they were enough to make experts of the invincible realm feel like facing a formidable enemy. The strongest features of the two were concentrated in Li Tianlan. Dual wind veins. Dual thunder veins. This was equivalent to the potential of 2 Wang Xingxiao. How terrifying would the 4 meridians in Li Tianlan's body expand his potential? Absolute power, absolute speed. As long as Gu Xingyun thought about the future Li Tianlan, he felt a headache and even fear. The future was illusory. Gu Xingyun was very realistic. But in his current state he really had to think about it. It could be predicted that in the next few years, his injury could not be fully recovered. And Gu Qianchuan did not have the strength to check and balance Li Tianlan. Li Shi had this ability, but Gu Xingyun did not dare to fully believe in her position. Without the suppression of absolute force a few years later when his injury recovered, how terrifying would Li Tianlan be? Gu Xingyun's body trembled instinctively. He didn't want to admit his fear, but he was more and more sad in his heart. He suddenly found that in this situation, when the future deadly threat of Kunlun City rose under his eyes, the only thing he could expect was Wang Tianzong's courage. The Sword Emperor held a sword in his hand, facing the eyes of the world, the 40,000 elites of the Border Praetorian Corps and the Dongqing clan. Did he dare to kill Li Tianlan with his sword? It wasn't that he didn't dare. But he needed support. But Wang Tianzong was seriously injured and surrounded by the army of the Dongqing clan. The last thing Gu Xingyun could give Wang Tianzong today was support. The future of Zhongzhou State is going to be lively. Gu Xingyun lowered his head, and his hoarse voice was filled with unconcealable unwillingness and anger. He laughed at himself and said, "Dual wind and thunder veins. With a sword in hand, I believe I can pierce through the sky." "I believe it too." Wang Tianzong nodded and said calmly, "But he has no chance." Dongqing Wudi, who was sitting next to them, turned to look at Wang Tianzong with indifferent eyes. "What does Tianzong mean? Boring." Wang Tianzong shook his head. "The future of Zhongzhou State may be very exciting and lively. I don't think it has anything to do with Li Tianlan." He grasped, listened to the sea beside him and slowly stood up. The world could not see Wang Tianzong. But all the eyes in the stands were focused on Wang Tianzong in an instant. Below the viewing platform, the vast and mighty army of 40,000 suddenly stood still, their killing intent soaring into the sky. Dongqing Wudi was not angry or irritable. He just looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. His eyes were indifferent and determined. It was a determination that would not compromise in the slightest. Wang Tianzong smiled softly. He looked down at the neat and tidy army of 40,000 soldiers. There was a sea of people as far as the eye could see. "I won't kill him," Wang Tianzong whispered, "but he shouldn't have such brilliance. The Li family shouldn't have either." Dual wind and thunder veins? In Emperor Hall, Mount Dibbing. The conversation, which seemed to be chatting, negotiating, and confronting, was still going on. Summer Solstice saw the legendary night walking that only existed in the Invincible Manual. He saw Li Tianlan's punch, which could be said to be able to swallow mountains and rivers. On the screen, countless swords and figures were flying in the storm of power. Blood rushed into the woods with smoke and dust, and a passage hundreds of meters long appeared in the woods. In the punch full of death and destruction, Summer Solstice could only see power. The fierce power that could crush everything. "Is he handsome?" Qin Weibai's eyes were a little dazed. In her sight, Li Tianlan was floating in the air, expressionless. At this moment, There seemed to be only endless coldness and majesty all over his body. So familiar, so strange. The sword light, the crowd, the woods, and even heaven and earth were all shattered and dissipated under his punch. They were vulnerable. He stood quietly in the air, and everything around him seemed to be like ants. Qin Weibai smiled. Her delicate and dreamy face was full of happiness and happiness. Her eyebrows and eyes were curved. At this moment, Qin Weibai was no longer a cold goddess high above. She seemed to gather all the beauty and joy in the world invisibly. That was a smiling face that no one dared to look at. She finally saw what she wanted to see. She carefully pushed the chess pieces on the chessboard, and the result did not disappoint her. Goodbye. Qin Weibai stood up with a soft smile. Summer Solstice froze for a moment and squinted at Qin Weibai. The maneuver is not over yet, she said. It's over. As early as the beginning, the moment Tianlan entered the maneuver area, it was over. Now it's just that all accidents have been eliminated. Qin Weibai shook her head. Tianzong is still in the Sky Academy. Summer Solstice stared into Qin Weibai's eyes. Qin Weibai's smile slowly faded and she finally said calmly, "So what?" She pointed to the stack of materials on the table. Summer Solstice had finished reading the materials. Qin Weibai didn't lie. This was a threat, the most direct, naked and undisguised threat. "I'll give it to you," Qin Weibai said, then turned and walked out of Emperor Hall. Until this moment she was really sure that everything had a result. A new era was coming. No force could suppress Li Tianlan and East Emperor Palace. The Wang family of Beihai couldn't. Neither could the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. Summer Solstice didn't go through the materials on the table again, nor did she give it to Qin Weibai. Her eyes fell on the screen again. On the screen, Jiang Shangyu and Gu Hanshan stood together. When all the elites were wiped out, the two tried to get close to Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao still stood quietly. The sharp sword energy around him became more and more violent. The thick and sticky sword intent filled every inch of space, completely wrapping Wang Xingxiao in the center. In the beginning it was undulating like waves. Now the sea-like sword energy was roaring like a tide. Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu tried to get close, but they couldn't get close to him in the sea-like sword intent. Gu Hanshan seemed to realize something. His face changed and he quickly opened his mouth and shouted. The thick, statue-like firmament moved slightly. Summer Solstice couldn't hear what Gu Hanshan was saying. But she saw the sword edge of the shaking firmament. The low-key and almost unknown expert at the peak of the invincible realm sighed softly. She felt that her son had done a good job today. But she would not ignore one fact. That was, except for the sword intent that deceived all the people on the scene. Li Tianlan had not drawn his sword so far. Are you crazy? When he couldn't even get close to Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanshan finally realized what Wang Xingxiao was doing. His face turned a little pale in an instant. He looked at Wang Xingxiao, who was extremely quiet with his eyes closed. Gu Hanshan couldn't believe it. Li Tianlan floated quietly in the air. More than half of the 6 teams were dead or injured. The maneuver had come to this point and it was already the last moment. Li Tianlan's heart was calm and indifferent. His aura had always been stable at an optimal balance point, neither high nor low, without any ups and downs. He held the branch that had been broken at the beginning of the maneuver in his hand, and a few green branches and leaves trembled slightly. He was as illusory as a gust of wind, but he was as real as the sun in the sky, with tranquility and heat that could burn everything. He was motionless. He waited in silence. He waited for Wang Xingxiao's strongest blow, and for Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu to join hands. The whole world had seen his sword, and it should also see his strength. He didn't think about the so-called Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State and the Sword God of Zhongzhou State. Now he was standing here facing his opponents. He waited for his opponent's strongest blow, and then completely crushed all their counterattacks with the strongest sword. From today on he was the chosen one. There was no prefix of young. There was no suffix of one. The chosen one was the chosen one. The sword was the sword and martial arts was martial arts. He has more courage than you. Whether it's facing the enemy or finding your own path, you're far behind. Li Tianlan said in a flat tone. I'm just more sober and calm than him. Gu Hanshan gritted his teeth and said coldly. His body was penetrated by Li Tianlan's sword. At this time his whole body was tense, but the wound was getting worse and blood had dyed his legs red. Under such circumstances he still didn't quit the maneuver. Gu Hanshan didn't think he lacked courage. Calm? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. Under the eyes of the world, your calmness is cowardice. You lost the maneuver, lost your courage, and lost your boldness. When the glory of Kunlun City is gone, your heavenly king heart is a joke. I don't think what he said is wrong. A voice suddenly sounded, interrupting Gu Hanshan's words. Jiang Shangyu slowly took a step forward. What do you mean? Gu Hanshan asked with a frown. He's very strong. Jiang Shangyu didn't look at Gu Hanshan, but at Li Tianlan. None of us is his opponent. But no matter how strong he is, he's not invincible. We still have a chance to win. I don't care about this maneuver, but I have to get back the dignity and confidence that he broke. I don't want to give up my courage when I still have a chance to win. He glanced at Gu Hanshan. Your conservatism may be calmness. But I think it's cowardice if you don't fight. I'll give you a chance. Li Tianlan's tone was calm, but it was full of absolute confidence. You will all be under my feet today. After today, my opponents will no longer be you. Arrogant. Gu Hanshan's face was livid. Jiang Shangyu didn't speak. He just took a deep look at Li Tianlan, suddenly laughed and walked directly to Wang Xingxiao. His body became hazy, and a faint blue light enveloped his whole body. Jiang Shangyu's aura began to rise wildly, twisting the space and tearing the ground. His figure was extremely heavy. Why? Gu Hanshan finally couldn't help asking. Jiang Shangyu's figure paused and he said flatly, for victory. He didn't care about Li Tianlan's future threat, because it had nothing to do with him. He was willing to pay the price he could. All of this was because of his most determined state of mind and victory. The roaring sword energy around Wang Xingxiao suddenly calmed down completely. It was like the sea after a tsunami, calm and still but more dangerous. Jiang Shangyu walked into the sword intent of Wang Xingxiao. His steps were extremely difficult, but he didn't flinch. The starlight illuminated the sword intent like the sea. The quiet and still sword energy began to shine. Gu Hanshan's face changed. He hesitated several times but finally didn't move. He didn't want to pay a big price. In his opinion, both Wang Xingxiao and Jiang Shangyu were fools. The two fools stood side by side in the sword intent and starlight all over the sky. Wang Xingxiao, who had been silent for a long time, finally opened his eyes. He held the heavy sword of firmament with both hands. The heavy sword trembled in his hands. The sword energy all over the sky faded away, like a receding tide, and disappeared in an instant. Wang Xingxiao stood there. One man and one sword. It was simple. His momentum kept rising, but his essence, qi and spirit began to slowly decline. In everyone's sight, Wang Xingxiao's short hair lost its luster, and eventually turned white at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was like a snowstorm falling on his head. But his aura was unprecedentedly calm and powerful. Wang Xingxiao laughed. With his white hair, his smile was bright. I have one more sword. Good sword. Li Tianlan's calm eyes finally became serious. But it's not enough. What about me? Jiang Shangyu suddenly asked. His essence, qi and spirit were also weakening. His aura kept rising as if he had broken through his limit in an instant. Martial arts cultivation from the very beginning to climb toward the invincible realm, constantly breaking realms and becoming stronger, was to pursue more extreme destructive power. In the case that he couldn't break through for the time being, he seemed to have the extreme character of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Xingxiao took the opposite approach. So did Jiang Shangyu. They didn't break through realms. They were lowering their realms. After all, Jiang Shangyu's sacrifice was a little small. Wang Xingxiao was completely gambling. He took a big step back. From then on, he chased Li Tianlan's back. Under great pressure, he only had this sword. A sword that represented his whole thunder-shocking realm. He used the whole thunder-shocking realm as the price. This was destined to be the strongest sword that he had lowered his realm in his life. No matter whether he won or lost. This was all his fighting will. The road of martial arts was sailing against the current. Advancing a realm was as difficult as ascending to heaven. Wasn't retreating a realm as difficult as ascending to heaven? Wang Xingxiao held the hilt tightly and took a step forward. The distance between the two was less than 100 meters. Wang Xingxiao kept moving forward. His speed was getting faster and faster. The heavy firmament sword trembled crazily in his hand, producing a whistling sound that almost tore one's eardrums. The distance of 100 meters was covered in an instant. Wang Xingxiao turned into a bolt of lightning. This moment was the peak of his life. His mind was quiet. There was no victory or defeat, no future, no fetters. There was only his sword in his mind. His sword did not bring about lightning, nor did it bring about raging flames, nor did it bring about a gale. There was not even a sword chi. Everything disappeared on his heavy sword. A sword was a sword. Wang Xingxiao suddenly felt extremely relaxed, and his essence, chi, and spirit seemed to be constantly sublimating. He didn't use the 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai in the dark world, nor did he use any unique skill. This sword was just a straight thrust. He didn't think about anything, so he stabbed forward with indomitable will. Wang Xingxiao followed him closely. In the end, Gu Han, who didn't choose to lower his realm, also rushed up. In silence, Wang Xingxiao's sword came to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's body floated upward. His body kept rising higher and higher. The branch trembled in the high sky. Wang Xingxiao was also rising. Boom! Without a sound, the entire training area was suddenly filled with a loud noise that shook the heavens and the earth. There was still no sword energy or sword light on the firmament. But as the sword went up, everything within a radius of hundreds of meters in the whole maneuver area suddenly rose. The broken tree trunks, the muddy pond, the scattered leaves, the flying dust, the ruins of the teaching block in the warehouse, and countless boulders flew up crazily under the sword. This required not only sword intent but also speed and strength. Everything on the ground was rolled up and smashed toward Li Tianlan, covering the sky and earth. Wang Xingxiao held the sword quietly and still stabbed forward. The simplest and most direct. In the stands, seeing this scene, a soft smile finally crossed Wang Xingxiao's eyes. This seemingly ordinary sword was not a unique skill, but it was already better than a unique skill. With this sword alone, Wang Tianzong felt that he didn't come in vain. The sword light was getting faster and faster. Li Tianlan was getting higher and higher. The maneuver area was getting smaller and smaller. It was so small that the whole view of the maneuver area could be seen clearly, and the huge training ground and stands outside the maneuver area could be seen. Li Tianlan saw Song Ci, who had given up, rushing out of the sky in the woods. Her long sword rushed over with sharp sword light. She was also lowering her realm. Song Ci was desperate, gentle and decisive. The sun was still shining, but the sky was getting dark. Gu Han fully launched the 10th unique domain. Starlight lit up in the 10th unique domain. The heavy sword firmament passed through the darkness and stabbed straight forward in the starlight. Song Ci, who had broken out to the limit, rushed into the pseudo-domain at the same time, with unparalleled sword light, like a meteor cutting through the night sky. There were no other enemies in Li Tianlan's eyes. Gu Han didn't lower his realm. But in addition to Wang Xingxiao and Jiang Shangyu, there was Song Ci, who was also lowering her realm. The 3 of them joined forces and became a private one. This blow completely surpassed the domain formed by the 3's previous strongest blow. Li Tianlan finally lifted the branch in his hand. Wang Xingxiao's sword finally stabbed Li Tianlan. Everything happened in a second. In the blink of an eye. Wang Xingxiao's extremely powerful aura suddenly fell to the bottom. But the sword intent that he had accumulated and compressed to the extreme, along with all his strength and physical strength, poured out in the most hysterical way at the same time in this second. The sword intent went away, and the sword energy surrounded the heavy sword firmament. The pseudo-domain and the starry sky shook at the same time. A black spot appeared high in the sky. The black spot expanded in an instant and became a huge vortex with a diameter of hundreds of meters in an instant. The vortex spun wildly. Endless sword chi with the most naked and crazy destructive aura poured down crazily. The sword energy penetrated the pseudo-domain and the space. The space of hundreds of meters was completely twisted and shattered, and the air was mottled. This straight stab seemed to really tear the sky. This was an all-out sword strike. At the cost of the entire thunder-shocking realm. After this sword strike, Wang Xingxiao would return to the peak of the fire-flaming realm. But the power of this sword strike was infinitely close to the real combat capability of the invincible realm. The sword energy broke out endlessly, vast and mighty in the sky, and never stopped. The pseudo-domain began to compress desperately. The starlight diffused and gathered into the shadow of a fist. Song Ci, who was also lowering her realm and bursting out with all her strength, screamed and slashed at Li Tianlan. The sky became completely chaotic. Li Tianlan's body was stained with blood. But his expression was still calm and calm. He put the branch upright in front of him. It was as beautiful as raising a sword. In the mottled sky, his figure seemed to disappear in an instant. He was in everyone's line of sight, but he was as illusory as an illusion. But the branch in his hand, which had never had a sense of existence, became more real than ever. This was Li Tianlan's sword. His swordsmanship. The sword strike with all his strength was also the most perfect sword strike he had so far. This was the only comprehensive move in his swordsmanship that he could fully master. It was the combination of cutting the sky and breaking the sea and other sword intents. Wang Xingxiao's sword converged everything and became a pure sword. But Li Qianlan's sword became heaven and earth at this moment. A crisp green leaf broke away from the branch and kept flying in the distorted pseudo-domain. The moment the pseudo-domain collapsed, heaven and earth seemed to close without reservation. The whole world kept shrinking in the flying green leaf, getting smaller and smaller, squeezing everyone's space of activity. The green leaf kept swaying in the shrinking space, getting bigger and bigger, almost occupying everyone's vision. The pattern of the leaf became clearer and clearer, with the flowing sword intent. The whole world was extremely quiet, as if only this leaf was left. In the silent darkness, the light that filled everyone's consciousness suddenly bloomed. The speed of the leaf suddenly accelerated, crazily flowing with the sword intent that contained nothingness but also everything. The world was unprecedentedly quiet. The mountains, rivers, seas, and the so-called majestic grandeur were all pulled down infinitely, so much so that everything seemed so illusory. Everything seemed to be frozen in the most illusory moment of the flying leaves until eternity. This sword strike was completely separated from the 24 moves of sword. This was a swordsmanship that had never appeared in the dark world. This was Li Qianlan's strongest move now. The eternal silence of mountains and rivers. The leaf passed through the quiet and shrinking world, suddenly speeding up in the seemingly far distance, with a touch of irresistible sword energy, real and illusory. Clang! The leaf hit the huge heavy sword of firmament. The dark and solid middle was torn by a fragile leaf. The whole heavy sword was full of cracks, and a leaf-shaped hole appeared on the tip of the sword. The leaf continued to drift, directly passing through Wang Xingxiao's abdomen, penetrating Song Ci, shattering the sword wound on Guhan's Han, and finally rushed out of Wang Xingxiao's body. Blood splashed, dripping with dark red blood. Li Tianlan, whose body was also stained with blood, shook his arm. In an instant, all the leaves on the branch in his hand flew up at the same time. The world seemed to compress the real and the illusory again, and the purest darkness instantly lit up. The world seemed to be shrinking. A big hand appeared in the shrinking world. The big hand opened. All the leaves of Li Tianlan hit the palm of the big hand one by one, and then they were casually crushed into powder by the big hand. A huge pressure pressed everyone down wildly from the sky and straight to the ground. Li Tianlan was pressed down. But his expression was still as calm as water. Under the forever silent world, he defeated Wang Xingxiao, Jiang Shangyu, Guhan's Han, and Song Ci. In the end, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, the sword emperor of Zhongzhou state, appeared in front of him and casually broke his strongest sword intent. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong indifferently. Wang Tianzong stood in front of the 4 young people behind him. He looked down at his palm. The sun fell on his hand, and a drop of blood gradually appeared in his palm, dreamy and magnificent. Wang Tianzong's eyes narrowed. Chapter 383. Wang Tianzong didn't hide anything. His palm appeared on the huge screen in front of the stand. A few green leaves that were still green but no longer sharp fell from his hand. He stared down at the drop of blood in his palm. His hand was full of sunlight. The sunlight shone in the blood with dreamy crystal. Through the screen, everyone saw the blood in the sword emperor's hand. Everyone felt incredible. There was an uproar and shock. But after thinking about it carefully, no one knew what they were shocked about. The world was silent forever. The sword covered the world and all the light turned into darkness. The world was silent and empty. Only a few green leaves drifted with sword intent, and finally hit Wang Tianzong's palm with a drop of blood. This was undoubtedly the most powerful peak sword move in the younger generation. What on earth should they be shocked about? Looking at Wang Tianzong's palm, everyone didn't know whether to be shocked by Li Tianlan's strength or to sigh that Wang Tianzong was too strong. The unprecedented sword brought out a drop of blood in Wang Tianzong's palm. It seemed to be glory but also like humiliation. The shock in everyone's heart became complicated. A touch of sword intent surged in Wang Tianzong's palm. The sword intent wrapped the drop of blood dripped from his fingers and fell on the green leaves under his feet. The small invisible wound in his palm had begun to heal. Wang Tianzong lowered his head and was silent for a long time. The entire maneuver area completely froze with his silence. Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong stood face to face. Wang Xingxiao and Song Ci lay together. Guhan's Han and Jiang Shangyu lay together. Both of them were in a coma. Li Tianlan didn't say a word. It wasn't that he didn't want to move but he couldn't. Wang Tianzong's sword intent was condensed, but it was invisible and intangible, firmly locking him in place. It was indescribable and irresistible sword intent that could easily tear him apart. Li Tianlan stood quietly, restrained his sharpness, and even completely restrained his calmness and indifference. His body was like a piece of lifeless dead wood looking a little fake. Wang Tianzong raised his head and looked at Li Tianlan with playful eyes. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Li Tianlan bowed slightly. The invisible and intangible sword intent bound everything around him. Li Tianlan didn't dare to bend too much. His eyes were looking at the ground as he bent over. In the face of absolute martial power, his talent and sword principle were unprecedentedly powerless. He couldn't even give the most respectful salute. Salutation was not free. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched violently. He did not reveal the slightest bit of anger, but the way he looked at the ground became extremely obscure. Interesting. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan. His eyes were deep like the sea. Even though they were calm and gentle, they were still awe-inspiring. "But it is still not enough," he continued. Li Tianlan straightened up and looked into Wang Tianzong's eyes. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. He moved his eyes away and looked at the four opponents who were protected by Wang Tianzong and were now in a coma. "For them it's enough," Li Tianlan said. "It's not enough for me." Wang Tianzong's voice was indifferent and clear. What was clear was his attitude. Li Tianlan's body tightened little by little. The air was filled with sword intent, but there was no killing intent. But Wang Tianzong's "not enough for me" was enough to explain everything. There was a sound of air breaking in the woods behind him. Three figures passed through the passage in the woods that was blasted out by Li Tianlan's punch at the fastest speed and finally stood between Wang Tianzong and Li Tianlan. Zhuang Huayang, Dongqing Wudi, and Cool Breeze, the director of the political department of the Sky Academy and the top assassin of Sai City. In terms of martial arts, these were just three experts who had not entered the invincible realm. But in terms of the general trend, these three people represented the academics, the giant group, and Sai City respectively on such an occasion. The three rushed over as soon as Wang Tianzong disappeared, and it was not until now that they arrived at the scene. Seeing Li Tianlan standing there safe and sound, the three almost breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Wang Tianzong's eyebrows suddenly raised, like a long sword out of its sheath. He had been calm before, but at this moment as he raised his eyebrows, Wang Tianzong suddenly became extremely strong and fierce. "Get out of the way," Wang Tianzong said blandly. "Your Majesty, why do you have to do this? The maneuver of the two academies is a stage for young people. Now the result is clear, please respect the rules of the maneuver of the two academies, Your Majesty," Zhuang Huayang said seriously. After Li Tianlan's sword intent was torn apart, before Wang Xingxiao and others lowered their realms to attack. In that short period of time, Zhuang Huayang had received a call from the chief. What one hears may be false, but seeing is believing. Li Tianlan's combat capability and potential were now seen by everyone in public. For the academics who had high hopes for Li Tianlan, they had to show a clear attitude of support at this time. "You can't stop me." Wang Tianzong took a step forward. The sword energy around Li Tianlan slowly shrank, and the three experts standing in front of Li Tianlan felt an overwhelming sense of oppression pouncing on them at the same time. Dongqing Wudi took a step forward. He was expressionless, but his eyes seemed to be burning with flames, fierce and resolute. "War?" he asked straightforwardly. On the grandstand in front of everyone he mobilized 40,000 troops, and at the same time used the power of Wang Wantian, the new commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations, to restrain the high-level officials of the Eastern Theater of Operations. He had already said the consequences if Wang Tianzong dared to take action. Wang Tianzong dared to break the rules and Dongqing Wudi dared to do whatever he could. As long as he touched Li Tianlan, it would be an endless war between the army headquarters and the Wang family of Beihai. That was Dongqing Wudi's overall situation. "I won't kill him." Wang Tianzong took a deep look at Dongqing Wudi and said slowly, "I just think he is more suitable to be an ordinary person. It's good for everyone." Dongqing Wudi moved forward again. He asked the same question in the same tone and content. "War?" Facing the strongest sword emperor in the dark world, Dongqing Wudi's attitude became more and more tough and aggressive. Wang Tianzong looked at his face. He observed for half a minute and then suddenly laughed. Listen to the sea trembled slightly in his hand. Wang Tianzong's thumb pushed the hilt of the sword. The bright blade was unsheathed inch by inch. It's war, he said. Whether it was his eyes or his expression, there was no room for refusal. Not killing Li Tianlan was his biggest compromise and concession. But Wang Qianzong did not think it was necessary to preserve his combat capability. Li Tianlan was still alive. In such a war, how much justice could the Dongqing clan occupy? The pupils of the Dongqing clan member suddenly contracted. He saw the unchangeable determination in Wang Qianzong's eyes. But he also had reasons not to compromise. Li Tianlan had to be alive, and his martial arts could not be damaged at all. Otherwise, what was the point of the giant group's years of planning? Your Majesty, Sai City is only a few hundred miles away from the Wang family of Beihai. It's very close. Cool Breeze's voice was soft as if he was reminding him, but his expression was also extremely determined. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. They were the two top assassins known as the Double Walls of Sai City. They could get to where they were today not only by force. They also had ability. At least on such an occasion, Cool Breeze stood here, and he was qualified to represent the entire Sai City. Sai City was only a few hundred miles away from Beihai Province. This distance was within the shooting range of medium-range missiles. The top assassins of Sai City could cross this distance within a day. Cool Breeze's words were short, but the meaning was very meaningful and rich. Wang Qianzong was still laughing. The most impression that the Sword Emperor left to Zhongzhou State and the Dark World was his calm and silent face, which made people not know what he was thinking. He was handsome when he smiled, with a unique charm of an old man, and looked very warm. But in Cool Breeze's eyes, this smile carried a kind of unspeakable danger. He was tense all over and was about to move. Wang Qianzong had already taken a step forward. The sword energy around Li Tianlan suddenly expanded and filled a straight line between them. In an instant, Cool Breeze only felt that there was a mountain on his body. As far as his eyes could see, the forest on the ground was constantly rising, and the sky and the scorching sun were suddenly far away. Messy smoke and dust rose up and fluttered down. Cool Breeze's vision was in a violent trance, and he noticed the sharp pain in his body. The endless sense of oppression squeezed him from all directions, and for a moment, it was extremely difficult for him to even move a little finger. Cool Breeze suddenly woke up. Heaven and earth were still heaven and earth. Never rising, never far away. It was his body that fell. The sword intent surged. The heavy sword pressure was on him. When Wang Qianzong's foot fell, Cool Breeze's whole body was directly pressed into the ground. His bones and muscles were intact, but most of his body was pressed into the ground, leaving only his head on the ground. Cool Breeze opened his eyes in astonishment. He couldn't look up. In his sight he could only see Wang Qianzong's shoes. I don't accept threats. Wang Qianzong looked down at Cool Breeze. He was really condescending. Cool Breeze's face turned red in an instant. He wanted to get angry, but Wang Qianzong's eyes had fallen directly on Li Tianlan. His eyes were deep, dangerous and indifferent, like a goshawk staring at a hare. Your Majesty. Zhuang Huayang gritted his teeth. Get out. Wang Qianzong said lightly. He walked past Cool Breeze and didn't even look at Zhuang Huayang. Zhuang Huayang's eyes narrowed tightly. Anger? Humiliation. These were not the most important things. He was in his 70s and had experienced too many ups and downs in his life. A word, get out, was far from enough to make him lose his composure. What he felt most intuitively was Wang Tianzong's determination. This maneuver made the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City truly realize the infinite possibilities and great threats of Li Tianlan in the future. Wang Tianzong broke the rules, trampled on everything, ignored the general trend, and made it clear that he wanted to completely disable Li Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi's face, which had always been extremely calm, gradually twisted, became ferocious, and became crazy. The big screen in front of the stand was still on. Dongqing Wudi raised his hand. His palm was steady and determined. Today in Huading he was ready to bear all the consequences. So now he dared to do anything. Wang Qianzong was the best in the world. He dared to trample on the rules to disable Li Tianlan, but Dongqing Wudi did not believe that he dared to completely ignore Zhongzhou State and hurt a director of the decision-making committee. Wang Qianzong had made up his mind. He wanted war. Dongqing Wudi would give him war. In the sun, in the shadow of the woods, Dongqing Wudi suddenly closed his palm, clenched his fist and waved it hard. In front of the stand, the 40,000 iron-blooded elites of the Border Control Corps saw this scene clearly. This gesture only meant a military order in the Border Control Corps. All-out attack. At all costs. Major General Li Zhonghu of the Blood Battalion of the Border Control Corps suddenly roared at the top of his voice. The moment the 40,000 troops stood at attention, a hoarse roar that hurt their throats because it was too violent suddenly sounded, shaking the sky. Border Control Corps. Advance. Li Zhonghu of the Blood Battalion. Sun Mingran of the Pegasus Battalion. Guan Jingjia of the Wild Sand Battalion. Wu Junyu of the Black Dragon Battalion. The four highest generals present in the 40,000 troops sprinted at full speed. They took the lead. The military was in front. The soldiers were behind. The almost boundless army began to charge at the same time without hesitation. The heavy footsteps were like muffled thunder that shook the Sky Academy one after another. They were irritable and fanatical. The 40,000 troops surged toward the maneuver area at the fastest speed. The crowd turned into a huge wave in an instant. The entire Sky Academy trembled and shook in the charge of the 40,000 troops. Dust was flying all over the sky. The high platform kept shaking. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them with a pale face. Looking at the most elite army of Zhongzhou State rushing forward without hesitation to the most powerful sword emperor of Zhongzhou State, Zhou Xuanji was stunned. They risked their lives. The fighter jets and helicopters that took off from the Sky Academy began to dive. One tank after another rushed out of the arsenal. The momentum was great. No compromise, no retreat. No rest until one of them died. Wang Tianzong clearly heard the charge and roar of the 40,000 troops in the Sky Academy, clearly felt the violent vibration of the earth, and clearly saw the fighter jets that began to dive here in the sky. Wang Tianzong suddenly felt grateful to the Samsara Palace. Thanks to the deep sea near the Samsara Palace. If it were him a few days ago, even if he could retreat today, it would be extremely difficult for him to deal with today's situation. In the silent and heavy deep sea, he brought up a 10,000-meter-long sword that went straight to the ninth heaven. That sword was enough to overturn the whole world. Logically speaking, he took another half a step forward in the pinnacle of his realm. So for him, Li Tianlan's sword intent was not enough. 40,000 troops were not enough. There were not enough fighter jets in the sky. The sword listened to the sea was slowly unsheathed in his hand. The wisps of sword energy were as heavy as mountains, surging like the sea and as high as the sky. The sword energy was not strong. But it was perfect. It was natural. Li Tianlan stood in the center of the sword energy, as if to isolate himself from the whole world. There was no sound, no scenery, and no figure around. It was all light. Pure light. Endless light. The light shook gently. Li Tianlan, who had almost won the team maneuver with a perfect victory, suddenly burst out a lot of blood all over his body. His face turned pale in an instant. His straightened body seemed to be under immense pressure, and all the bones in his body were contracting. Li Tianlan's eyes were quiet and calm. The great pain was getting stronger and stronger. The heavy sword intent seemed to crush everything in him. He stood where he was with all his strength. He didn't retreat. He didn't bend down. If today was the end of his life, he would always maintain the most arrogant posture, give the world a memorable victory, and also give the world the most wonderful ending. Wang Tianzong felt Li Tianlan's pride and tenacity. He smiled gently. There was no mockery, no playfulness, no emotion, and no melancholy. It was just a pure smile. It's useless. He said, if I want to kill you, no one can stop me. I can stop you. Li Tianlan said softly. His voice was stable, but under the severe pain, his voice was a little weak and hoarse. Blood gushed out of his mouth. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong calmly. How old are you this year? Wang Tianzong froze for a moment. In my 50s. Is really half of my life. Li Tianlan asked and answered his own question. In the wildly rolling sword intent, Li Tianlan struggled to raise his hand. Copious amounts of fresh blood sprayed down as he raised his hand, and a bone-deep wound suddenly appeared on his arm. Li Tianlan's expression was quiet and almost numb. In the sprinkling of blood, he flicked his fingers. A dull and subtle sound sounded directly behind Wang Tianzong, with a few extremely suppressed muffled groans. Wang Tianzong turned around without scruples. His pupils instantly condensed. In his sight, Wang Xingxiao, Song Ci, Jiang Shangyu, and Gu Hanshan had woken up from a coma. As Li Tianlan flicked his fingers. In an instant, the illusory sword qi rushed out from various parts of their bodies, causing blood to blossom into the sky. Arms, legs, abdomens, eyes, noses, and mouths. Blood was gushing everywhere. Wang Xingxiao, who was the most seriously injured, directly fell to the bottom at the moment when the sword intent broke out, and his eyes became dim. There was a flash of hesitation in Wang Tianzong's eyes. He looked back at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's expression was still calm, but his eyes flashed with a ferocious, crazy, and somewhat hysterical grin. He saw the hesitation in Wang Tianzong's eyes. But he had no intention of negotiating at all. If these chips couldn't stop Wang Tianzong's attack, Wang Tianzong also couldn't stop the destructive sword energy that Li Tianlan had left in the bodies of Wang Xingxiao and the other three. His body was getting closer and closer. The four people who came to their senses kept twitching. The sword energy surged faster and faster, and the four people were all covered with blood. Wang Shengxiao gritted his teeth, and his eyes were in a trance and dim. Among the four, Gu Hanshan, who should have been the most strong-willed, was the first to scream. "Help me! Help me! Hurry up, help me!" He looked up and fell to the ground powerlessly, howling desperately. Fountains of blood rose in his eyes one after another. All of them were his own blood. Not bad. Wang Tianzong's eyes calmed down again. "Is it enough?" Li Tianlan said coldly. "Not enough." Wang Tianzong lowered his eyelids and said indifferently. Li Tianlan laughed. He didn't think about Wang Tianzong's attitude, so Li Tianlan wouldn't be surprised by any of his attitudes. "I will die," Li Tianlan said calmly, "but the four of them, one by one, will go with me today. Wang Xingxiao is very good. Your Majesty, after he leaves, can you cultivate such an excellent son in more than 20 years? You seem to have forgotten one thing." Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan and smiled. "The thing that saved your life 3 years ago came from the Wang family of Beihai. Have you forgotten?" 3 years ago, Li Tianlan's eyes flashed. The thing that saved his life 3 years ago was the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State. But Wang Tianzong didn't mean that. If he went further, immortality potion. Li Tianlan glanced at the four young people behind Wang Tianzong and sneered slightly. "For immortality? Your Majesty is really generous. One is enough," Wang Tianzong said coldly. "Under such an injury, Song Ci wouldn't die. Maybe her martial arts would be destroyed, but the probability of death was not high. He now had an immortality and he would give it to Wang Xingxiao. As for Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu, what did it have to do with him? You can't stop me." Wang Tianzong took another step forward. In the increasingly fierce sword energy, Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. "Bring it on." Until they walked down Mount Dibing. Qin Weibai never told Lin Fengting about her conversation with Summer Solstice. Lin Fengting was not more interested in this. He was more concerned about the result of the maneuver of Zhongzhou State. "What?" Lin Fengting asked. "What?" Qin Weibai nodded. "Tianlan is very strong now, but I didn't see the end." Lin Fengting paused and looked at Qin Weibai. "Aren't you worried?" "Of course." Qin Weibai smiled. "I want to see the end too. But I'm afraid that Summer Solstice will lose her temper and refuse to compromise in front of me. Wang Tianzong will give in, but women are often unreasonable. If I don't stay there, she will have the idea of compromise. In this case, I'll take a step back." Lin Fengting vaguely guessed what the information in Qin Weibai's hand was. So Wang Tianzong's compromise was almost certain in his view. He just felt a little pity and a little lucky. His thoughts were so complicated that he didn't know what he was thinking. "That information," Lin Fengting shook his head with some regret. "I didn't expect to use it here." "I didn't expect it either." Qin Weibai's eyes were shining with thinking. "But it's good. Just in case, it's just right to use it here." She paused and said softly, "I can't help him with everything. But that information can only be exchanged for a few months or half a year at most." Lin Fengting looked at Qin Weibai. "Don't you think it's a pity? What about half a year later?" "Half a year later," Qin Weibai stretched herself. Her absolutely perfect body proportion seemed to have a layer of sacred light in the sun. "Everything will be different then." Lin Fengting didn't speak. He just turned around quietly and looked at the Emperor Palace on the top of the mountain. Summer Solstice appeared at the top of the Emperor Palace, quietly looking in the direction where Qin Weibai left. There was confusion, helplessness, and a little relief in her eyes. It was extremely complicated. After thinking about it, she sighed and took out her mobile phone to call Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong had already walked in front of Li Tianlan. The sword energy that covered all the nearby space under the flat surface completely condensed as he moved forward. The condensed sword intent floated above Li Tianlan's head, with an obvious sense of destruction. "I gave you a chance." Wang Tianzong looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. "Do you regret it?" Li Tianlan looked up at the sword energy above his head. Wang Xingxiao and the others were still surging with blood. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little regretful and unwilling, but they finally turned into calmness. If I don't die, it's no big deal to start all over again. He looked into Wang Tianzong's eyes and said blandly, even if I die, there must be someone to accompany me on the road to hell. Do it. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan. In silence, the sword intent above Li Tianlan's head began to spin wildly. A phone suddenly rang. Wang Tianzong froze and his eyes subconsciously softened. In his mobile phone, only this phone was set with a special ringtone. So he knew who it was without looking. He knew that the other party was also watching the maneuver at this time. Since she called at this time, it meant that Wang Tianzong had to answer it. Wang Tianzong took out his mobile phone. There was only one word on the note on the screen. Solstice. Wang Tianzong pressed the answer button and softly said hello. Tianzong, Li Tianlan can't be touched. Summer Solstice's voice came over the phone. Wang Tianzong uttered a short syllable. Feng Ting just took Qin Weibai to Mount Dibing. Summer Solstice lowered her voice. Qin Weibai left something. It's related to the whole of Beihai. Li Tianlan really can't be touched. Otherwise, the consequences will be unimaginable. Tianzong, come back first. The consequences would be unimaginable. This was the second time Wang Tianzong had heard this sentence since he knew Summer Solstice. Shortly after he heard this sentence for the first time, the treason case of Zhongzhou State that had affected to this day took place in Zhongzhou State. Wang Tianzong silently hung up the phone. He didn't know what Qin Weibai left. But it was related to the whole of Beihai, and the consequences would be unimaginable. This had already given him a reason to restrain his killing intent. Enough. Wang Tianzong said calmly. The sword intent all over the sky disappeared in an instant. Li Tianlan withdrew his fingers. The four young masters behind Wang Tianzong suddenly stopped bleeding, and they were extremely weak. I'll remember this sword move first. Wang Tianzong said. The wind rose in the maneuver field. Wang Tianzong's figure gradually became transparent and faded in the sudden wind, and then disappeared completely. The figures of Wang Xingxiao, Song Ci, Jiang Shangyu, and Gu Hanshan also disappeared with Wang Tianzong. Everything happened in a few seconds. The bodies of Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu fell in front of Gu Xingyun in the air. Wang Tianzong did not appear. The majestic sword intent in the air crossed the sky and went all the way away. The 40,000 troops who were about to rush into the maneuver area stopped in front of the big screen. On the big screen, Wang Tianzong's figure disappeared. Li Tianlan still stood there quietly. Without that sword move, there would be no more war. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he slowly moved his body. He walked forward for a distance and pulled Cool Breeze, whose whole body was pressed into the ground, out of the ground. It's good that you're all right. Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang got rid of the sword intent and moved freely. They came to Li Tianlan immediately. Li Tianlan nodded thoughtfully. Let's go out first, Dongqing Wudi said. They walked along the passage that Li Tianlan punched out, passed by blood and corpses along the way, and finally walked out of the forest. The big screen was still standing. Countless people looked at Li Tianlan on the screen with complicated eyes. The 40,000 troops had been neatly lined up outside the forest. The fighters in the air began to disperse. But the iron-blooded killing intent that filled the sky still remained. Li Tianlan looked at them quietly, at these elite troops who were most loyal to the Dongqing clan. They obeyed Dongqing Wudi's military orders. They were willing to die for the marshal in their hearts, and they were also willing to die for him. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. He took a deep breath, raised his hand and saluted. The 40,000 troops looked solemn and returned the salute at the same time. Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood, looked pale, but his spirit was abnormally abundant. Facing the vast and boundless phalanx in front of him, he bowed deeply. His soft but gentle voice echoed in everyone's ears. Thank you, everyone. Major General Li Zhonghu of the Blood Battalion was stunned and subconsciously wanted to dodge. He looked up at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi smiled and nodded slowly but firmly. Li Zhonghu, who was still saluting, put down his arm. The next second, in the horrified eyes of countless people, the 40,000 troops. The 40,000 people standing in front of Li Tianlan knelt on one knee in front of the young man who bowed deeply in front of them. The scene was completely frozen. It was so restless, so solemn, so solemn. It was like taking an oath. The neat voices of 40,000 people rang through the sky and echoed in the Sky Academy for a long time. The Border Control Corps pays respect to Your Highness. Chapter 384. Everyone looked at this scene speechlessly. The entire 40,000 troops knelt down at the same time, like a surging tide, and instantly quieted down in front of Li Tianlan. 40,000 troops. Li Tianlan. One kneeled and the other bowed. In the lingering sound of shouting "Your Highness," there was a suffocating power. No one dared to make irresponsible remarks about this seemingly normal but actually extremely abnormal scene. Gu Xingyun didn't dare either. Even if the most elite 40,000 troops looked more like the private army of the Dongqing clan at this time. Thinking of the Border Control Corps, everyone thought of a taboo or at least a taboo name. Dongqing Corps. Both the Dongqing clan and the official denied this name. But wasn't the Dongqing Corps in this scene? Even more than the Dongqing Corps. The light of the big screen turned. The scene in the maneuver area disappeared. The scene of a dense army kneeling in front of Li Tianlan appeared on the big screen. In the field. Outside the field. Inside and outside Zhongzhou State. Countless people saw this scene. Compared with the little scar left on Wang Tianzong's palm by Li Tianlan's sword intent. The scene in front of them was really shocking. Because the meaning of this scene was too rich. The military super-wealthy family with a giant in Zhongzhou State, the most elite 40,000 troops among hundreds of thousands of troops, shouldering the responsibility of the Li family, the 22-year-old invincible realm combat capability. Sai City, the academics. Gu Xingyun, who was seriously injured, had left. Wang Tianzong, who still had killing intent. Everything was mixed together invisibly. Li Tianlan fully proved his potential today. The performance of Dongqing Wudi and the 40,000 troops also completely showed that the Dongqing clan had regarded Li Tianlan as its future core. The academics expressed a certain degree of support for Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong's killing intent did not dissipate, but he suddenly left. Gu Xingyun did not make a move because of his injury, but it was obvious that he would not let Li Tianlan grow up. All the contradictions and conflicts appeared in front of people. And it was foreseeable that as Li Tianlan and the East Emperor Palace became stronger, such conflicts would continue to escalate. This was a vortex that could swallow Zhongzhou State. And Li Tianlan was standing in the center of the vortex at this time. There were still not many people who were optimistic about Li Tianlan, but more than half of those who really thought that Li Tianlan couldn't make it had disappeared. As the young governor of Sai City, he had the combat capability of the invincible realm, and he had the full support of the Dongqing clan and the inclination of the academics. Compared with the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, Li Tianlan might still be relatively weak. But he no longer had any shortcomings. No one dared to say that Li Tianlan had no background. The Dongqing clan, Sai City, and even the academics would become powerful forces for him to break the Li family's imprisonment in the future. Li Tianlan slowly stood up straight. Get up. His tone was calm. The 40,000 soldiers stood up and saluted him again. When they knelt down, they shouted, "Your Highness." Li Tianlan understood what Dongqing Wudi meant, so he knew very well what he should do. Withdraw from the Sky Academy first. The exercise is over. The maneuver was not over yet. But for Li Tianlan, the next maneuver was meaningless. The East Emperor Palace was already the first. The various exercises that followed were meaningless to many people. Today was the first day of the maneuver. For too many people, the real maneuver had actually ended. It ended like this. The 40,000 troops kept a neat formation and began to walk out of the Sky Academy. The fighter jets and helicopters in the sky slowly landed. The tanks and armored vehicles returned to the arsenal. The tense atmosphere gradually dissipated with the departure of the army. The sun was still shining. It was light and breezy. But all of this seemed to be the calm before the storm. Li Tianlan, the Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City. They were still there. The contradiction would not disappear. Li Tianlan walked to the high platform in front of the grandstand. There was applause in the packed grandstand. Everyone was applauding. Those who saw Li Tianlan, those who were not optimistic about him, the people of the Wang family of Beihai, and even Gu Xingyun were applauding. No matter how they felt inside. There should be applause here. The applause was dedicated to the young man who walked up the platform step by step at a steady pace. He was 22 years old. Very young. But he was His Highness. Dongqing Hongguang was also applauding. The applause in Luojing, Zhongyuan, naturally could not reach the Sky Academy, and Li Tianlan could not hear it. But all of Dongqing Hongguang's applause fell into the ears of the old man opposite him. The old man was dressed in a purple tang suit. His white hair had just been dyed black. He was thin and even his appearance was similar to Dongqing Hongguang's. However, compared with Dongqing Hongguang's usual gentleness and leisure, The old man was always tense, sitting there looking particularly majestic. He and Dongqing Hongguang had watched the maneuver of the two academies of Zhongzhou State together. At this time, when he heard the applause, his attitude was a little subtle. "How is it?" Dongqing Hongguang looked at the old man's subtle face and asked with a chuckle. "Not bad." The old man nodded. "Best," Dongqing Hongguang said without hesitation. The old man shook his head and seemed to be helpless. "You don't agree?" Dongqing Hongguang asked. "Does it make sense?" The old man shook his head, and his expression was a little complicated. "This was your choice back then. I didn't agree. But you didn't object." Dongqing Hongguang's expression became serious. He was the old patriarch of the Dongqing clan. But except for some new families, no one could have absolute ruling power in a big family. Even the patriarch was quite constrained in many aspects. The Dongqing clan was brave and loyal. They had their status today because generations of people exchanged their lives for it, and they were still willing to contribute to Zhongzhou State. There were several brothers and sisters in Dongqing Hongguang's generation, but most of them died on the battlefield. Only Dongqing Hongguang himself and the old man in purple in front of him survived until now. Dongqing Hongjian, Dongqing Hongguang's biological elder brother. Li Tianlan had told everyone how terrible his future would be with his performance. As Dongqing Hongguang's ideal core figure of the next generation, he definitely wanted to use all his strength and resources on Li Tianlan with the power of this maneuver, which required Dongqing Hongjian's approval. This attitude was extremely important. "He did a good job." Dongqing Hongjian was silent for a while and nodded gently. This was recognition. But recognition was only for his performance. Dongqing Hongguang seemed to know what his elder brother was thinking. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, there's still a lot of time." Dongqing Hongjian pondered for a while, then nodded and said, "Let's wait and see." He stood up and slowly left the hall. President Li Huaqing was also applauding. Hua Qingfeng, the sect leader of Zhongzhou State's shadow sect, who personally protected him during this visit, had arranged the itinerary. Like Li Huaqing, he witnessed the maneuver. Looking at the president applauding, Hua Qingfeng also had a smile on his face. "President," Hua Qingfeng whispered, "I helped you decline the dinner of the president of Star State. Our private plane takes off at 8 o'clock. Okay, I got it." Li Huaqing turned around. With a smile on his face, his eyes were bright, and his mind seemed to be immersed in the maneuver just now. The president didn't know martial arts. But he could see the result. He was very satisfied with Li Tianlan. Very satisfied. "Not bad." Li Huaqing suddenly laughed and didn't hide his mood at all. This was his 7th year as the president of Zhongzhou State. In another 3 years, Zhongzhou State would usher in a turbulent general election. Some undercurrents began to surge as early as last year and became more and more intense. Li Huaqing deserved to be in Zhongzhou State. In recent decades, among all the presidents, Li Huaqing was a very successful president. But he still hadn't completed the layout of the academics, which was undoubtedly a sore point for him. Li Tianlan's appearance seemed to be a good medicine. Especially from today on, his influence would not be limited to the special warfare system. This was what Li Huaqing wanted to see most. "You've worked hard, Qingfeng." Li Huaqing glanced at Hua Qingfeng and said with a smile. Hua Qingfeng shook his head with a smile, turned around and walked out of the room. Walking in the corridor of the White House, he thought for a moment and took out his phone again. The phone went directly back to Zhongzhou State and called a high-ranking official in the headquarters of Shadow Sect. "Did you watch the final maneuver?" Hua Qingfeng asked in a straightforward tone. "Yes." A somewhat emotional voice sounded on the phone. "A 22-year-old young highness. Tut-tut, among the younger generation that person is probably really invincible. Find a chance to get in touch with him," Hua Qingfeng said. "Cooperation?" The person on the other end of the phone was a little surprised. "Otherwise," Hua Qingfeng laughed. "Do we have to be enemies with him because he is too powerful? There is no conflict of interest." Sword Emperor. On the phone, the person was a little hesitant. He actually wanted to cooperate with Li Tianlan. But Wang Tianzong's killing intent toward Li Tianlan was obvious. No one thought that he would give up his killing intent after answering a phone call. This time, Li Tianlan could end up with a minor injury just because something was delayed. If he cooperated with Li Tianlan now, his future would be very difficult and he would offend Wang Tianzong, Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. In the hearts of all the experts in Zhongzhou State, this was a mountain, an insurmountable peak. Those who dared to cooperate with Li Tianlan before a clear situation appeared were basically giants in Zhongzhou state who were not afraid of the revenge of Kunlun city and the Wang family of Beihai. Shadow sect, which had almost no background, obviously did not have this confidence at present. It's okay. Hua Qingfeng's face was gloomy for a moment, but he still insisted on his opinion. He was very clear that those who dared to cooperate with Li Tianlan at this time were giants who were not afraid of revenge. But similarly, such giants, except for the Dongqing clan, would basically not fully support Li Tianlan. Most of what they did was just investment for the expected benefits. Today, Li Tianlan already had an absolutely strong background and strength. There was a whirlpool around him. But in Hua Qingfeng's view, it was also a great opportunity. According to the most basic maneuver process, Zhuang Huayang, the principal of the Sky Academy, accompanied Li Tianlan to the high platform in front of the stand. After making a very routine speech in praise, he announced that East Emperor Palace was the first place in the final team maneuver of the two academies. In fact, this was also equivalent to announcing that East Emperor Palace had become the first place in the total credits of the two academies. There was no suspense at all. But the maneuver was not over yet. Next, there were different maneuvers such as electronic intrusion, mechanical control, and one-on-one actual combat. If this year's team maneuver was a competition between the top young geniuses, then the next maneuver was the time for ordinary students to compete for credits and plot against each other. There were nearly 4,000 students in the two academies. The official end of the maneuver was August 10th. There were still 10 days. 10 days later, the two academies would announce the first place in the total credits of this year and the first place in various maneuvers. At the same time, the credits would be calculated, graduation ceremonies and commendation meetings would be held, and graduation medals and various awards would be awarded according to grades. At that time, the two academies would also hold something similar to a press conference. But there would be no reporters at the scene. In addition to the heavyweights of Kunlun City, the Ministry of National Defense, the Ministry of Security, and the General Staff, various departments of the military and the special warfare system would probably attend and choose the students they needed. So even if everyone knew that this year's maneuver of the two academies was actually over. But according to the process, today was actually just the beginning. But all of this, it had nothing to do with East Emperor Palace. On the last day after the maneuver, Li Tianlan only needed to send a representative to determine the future development direction of East Emperor Palace with the people of the Ministry of National Defense and Security and what support Zhongzhou State would give to East Emperor Palace. His heart had flown to the battlefield in Snow Country, which was destined to be chaotic, and to the Samsara Palace that had collapsed. Tianlan, do you have anything to say? Zhuang Huayang finally finished what even he thought was nonsense and handed the microphone to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took the microphone and looked at the full stands in front of him. His eyes were in a trance. He saw a lot of familiar people. Gu Xingyun, whose face was gloomy but forced a smile. Yi Fengqing, whose face was complicated. Li Beidian, who laughed and beamed with joy, sat in his wheelchair and talked as if there was no one else around. The members of East Emperor Palace surrounded him. Han Donglu, the founder of the Flourishing Age Fund, smiled and waved at him. Han Xinyan, who looked a little surprised. Dongqing Rushi, whose small face was full of colors, was clear and proud. Different people had different moods. But compared with the whole audience, the people he was familiar with were few. More people were destined to have more moods. Li Tianlan looked at them silently. There was another round of applause in the stands and it became more and more enthusiastic. Everyone was applauding. Li Tianlan froze for a while and finally understood. Finally, there was this day. He and the Li family could gradually not care about other people's thoughts. He stood here. There must be flowers and applause in front of him. Li Tianlan laughed. The Li family deserves to be in Zhongzhou State. I also deserve to be in the Li family. His voice was clear and indifferent. He still said some content implicitly. But everyone understood what he meant. The Li family deserves to be in Zhongzhou State. Of course, he was talking about the treason case many years ago. Li Tianlan paused and continued, in the dark world in the next 100 years, there are 3 words that are destined to be called great. Zhongzhou State. East Emperor Palace. Li Tianlan. He looked around at the audience. The greatest words. At this moment, Li Tianlan's heart was extremely calm. However, it was also filled with unparalleled arrogance. In the sun, his whole body was shining, and he looked like he was making threatening gestures. This was the Li family's first declaration to the public after many years of silence. It was also Li Tianlan's first declaration to Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State, East Emperor Palace, Li Tianlan. They would all be great. The applause rang out again. No matter whether they were willing or not, everyone was applauding hard. At this moment, Li Tianlan might not know that because of this maneuver, he had created countless records in the history of the Li family of the two academies. For the first time in all previous final maneuvers, he killed the game in advance and ended all suspense. In all previous final maneuvers he was the youngest and the strongest. In all previous final maneuvers he killed the most people and injured the most people. In all previous final maneuvers he had the highest total credits. There were many more firsts. On this day Li Tianlan, who was only 22 years old, stood here and swept away the joint efforts of several young chosen ones in Zhongzhou State with an absolutely invincible posture. He destroyed the cooperation of the 6 teams by himself. To be exact, he was alone. He shattered the whole era. That was the era of the future. The rise of the chosen ones. Was it the fortune of Zhongzhou State? Or the disaster of Zhongzhou State? Chapter 385. When he opened his eyes, the scorching sun on the horizon had gradually become dim. The afterglow of the setting sun shone through the window, rendering everything in the room more dazzling than when the sun was at its peak. Dusk enveloped everything in the outside world. The light was beautiful and brilliant, but with indescribable dilapidation and desolation. Jiang Shangyu lay on the bed, looking at the hazy and dazzling light outside the window. He was silent and didn't want to move. He seemed to have been injected with anesthetic. But the pain was still spreading in his body. The pain came from the inside and penetrated his skin from his internal organs. It was like sword intent, but it was extremely illusory. When it fell on his body, there was only coldness and destruction. The sharp pain dispelled the confusion after waking up from the coma. Jiang Shangyu felt the pain in his body. He finally realized who he was. Today was the final maneuver of the two academies. This was his most glorious moment. In front of the world he had never exposed his heavenly king heart. But he showed his martial arts to everyone. He came from a family that had only risen in recent decades, and his martial arts strength was extremely ordinary. But now he was qualified to be on par with Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao. He would definitely enter the invincible realm in the future. He was also a young chosen one. He was brilliant today. That move of the starry sky amazed the entire Zhongzhou State. But similarly, he was a loser today. His light might not fade, but in front of the real chosen one, all his glory would be overshadowed. When people mentioned him in the future, they might still mention his shining brilliance today. But the brilliance was like the dusk outside the window, gorgeous but dilapidated. No matter how dazzling it was still dark at the end. That sword intent. The sword that made the world silent and empty. That was the eternal light. Jiang Shangyu's eyes gradually changed. All kinds of colors intertwined in his pupils, and eventually became complicated emotions. He quietly opened his eyes and lay on the bed, a little sluggish. The door was pushed open from the outside. Gu Xingyun, who was pale and struggling to support himself, slowly walked into the ward. Li Shi was beside him. Jiang Shangyu moved his body and struggled to sit up. Your health matters. Just lie down. Gu Xingyun smiled and waved his hand. Your injuries are not light, but they will not threaten your foundation. However, you must exercise less in the future. He paused for a moment before continuing, but there won't be much to do next. Yes. Jiang Shangyu responded and then said, Your Highness. Madam, how are Hanshan's injuries? It's the same weight as you. During this period of time, you can recuperate in the Sky Academy. When the drill is over, come back with me. Gu Xingyun looked at Jiang Shangyu with soft eyes, with an obvious appreciation. I've informed your father. He was going to come over, but something happened in the northern borderline that he had to deal with. At that time, I will personally send you back to the northern borderline. Thank you, Your Highness. Jiang Shangyu said respectfully. No need to thank me. Gu Xingyun shook his head and said with a smile, We're on the same side. You don't have to be so polite. You boy, hurry to recuperate for me. Qingqing has always told me that she wants to travel to the northern borderline. After a while, I'll ask her to find you. You have to be a good tour guide for Qingqing. Don't let my daughter be wronged, okay? Jiang Shangyu froze for a moment. His eyes gradually showed a completely uncontrollable ecstasy, and his eyes subconsciously looked at Li Shi beside Gu Xingyun. Li Shi was expressionless, like a lifeless sculpture, but her eyes softened a little. She nodded slightly. Jiang Shangyu took a deep breath, but he could not hide the smile on his face in any case. The smile on his face kept expanding. In this state, Jiang Shangyu looked a little silly. Your Highness, don't worry. Qingqing will never be wronged in the northern borderline. Jiang Shangyu looked solemn and almost promised. His pale face was a little flushed with excitement, and his expression was solemn as if he was swearing. Gu Xingyun smiled gently, nodded and said meaningfully, "You're good. I'm very relieved to have Qingqing by your side." Jiang Shangyu scratched his head, and his smile became purer. "You pay attention to rest." Gu Xingyun said, "Don't think too much." Jiang Shangyu nodded. He hesitated a little but still said, "Your Highness Li Tianlan, don't worry." Gu Xingyun's figure paused. "You are still young. For you he is indeed very strong now. But 10 or 20 years later, looking back at today, you may feel that he just won a maneuver today. The one who can laugh to the end is the winner." Gu Xingyun's figure walked out of the ward. Jiang Shangyu looked at his and Li Shi's back with gloomy eyes, but he was thinking about Gu Xingyun's purpose of coming. This time it seemed to be a routine, but there was too much information in it. Jiang Shangyu had to sort out all the things. He liked Li Qingqing. He really liked her, and he liked her for many years. Although Li Qingqing was still very young at that time. When Jiang Shangyu saw her for the first time, he was very sure that Li Qingqing should not stay in Kunlun City, which looked brilliant but hid too much filth. He knew Phoenix Pavilion. So he could roughly guess Li Qingqing's fate in the future. In the process of development, the Jiang family had always been quietly and carefully touching some taboos. For Kunlun City, the Jiang family knew it more deeply than most people. 3 years ago in Heaven Capital, when Gong Sun Qi and even the Dongqing clan were reminding Li Tianlan to be careful of Phoenix Pavilion. Even earlier, the Jiang family had already learned through special intelligence channels that Li Shi was going to Heaven Capital. This also made Jiang Shangyu more sure of some of Gu Xingyun's plans. Li Shi went to Heaven Capital secretly, not for national affairs but for private affairs. But Li Tianlan's origin and Li Shi's past made Jiang Shangyu uncertain how far Li Shi would go. If Li Tianlan did not die, Li Qingqing was most likely the fatal poison prepared for Li Tianlan by Kunlun City. This was not Li Qingqing's destiny, but it was the destiny of Phoenix Pavilion. So in Heaven Capital, when Jiang Shangyu and Li Tianlan met for the first time, he had almost undisguised killing intent to Li Tianlan. At that time he did it for a woman. Or a girl. Gu Xingyun and Li Shi left the ward. The sound of the door closing was heard. Jiang Shangyu lay quietly on the bed thinking about all aspects. The cooperation between Gu Xingyun, Li Shi, Li Qingqing, Gu Hanshan and Li Tianlan, the future of the 3000 world, the choice that the Jiang family had to face, the Wang family of Beihai, thousands of thoughts formed a rough outline in his mind. The outline was clear. But there were too many possibilities inside the outline. Too many possibilities means too many choices. So it was extremely complicated. Jiang Shangyu thought about it silently for a long time. His cell phone rang. Jiang Shangyu took out his mobile phone and pressed the answer button. "It's me." On the other end of the phone, the voice of Jiang Shan, the leader of Beijiang, sounded. "Dad." Jiang Shangyu called with a smile, but his eyes were a little complicated. The father and son were silent on the other side of the phone. "I'm sorry." After a long time, Jiang Shangyu whispered, "Today? I lost." "It doesn't matter." Jiang Shangyu smiled and said, "You did a good job. A temporary failure is nothing." Jiang Shangyu wanted to speak, but when the words reached his mouth, he swallowed them back. After the strike of lowering the realm, his strength was pushed from the stabilization phase of the thundershocking realm to the level of just entering the thundershocking realm. His body became weaker, but his state of mind became more and more perfect. He said yes with a smile and didn't say much. "Don't push yourself too hard." Jiang Shan sighed softly. Jiang Shangyu was not only his son, but also the greatest pride of his life. This son had never made him worry about him since he was a child. His forbearance, his wisdom and his low key even amazed Jiang Shan many times. He had always seen what Jiang Shangyu had been doing over the years and even knew his plan. Today's final maneuver was the official beginning for the Li family and Li Tianlan. It was the same for Jiang Shangyu. He lost. But the plan would not be changed, let alone stopped. "It's okay." Jiang Shangyu's smile was light and breezy. He sat on the bed with his mobile phone. When he was about to continue to say something, he coughed violently. The cough came suddenly, but it was extremely violent. His whole body twitched violently with the cough, and the wounds on his body were also cracking. Thick blood flowed down his nostrils and fell on the quilt in front of him. Jiang Shan listened quietly, as silent as a dead man. After a long time, Jiang Shangyu breathed a sigh of relief and sat on the bed, panting violently. Nosebleed again? Jiang Shan asked. No. Jiang Shangyu raised his head. His voice was a little hoarse, but his smile was extremely bright. I'm really okay. Dad, don't worry about me. If it doesn't work, go back to Beijing. Jiang Shan's voice was weak, bitter, and trembling. Xiaoyu, you don't have to work so hard. I'm here in Beijing and no one dares to hurt you. Jiang Shangyu opened his eyes wide and looked at the ceiling above. There was no one here. So he didn't have to try hard to control his facial features. Strange, dark red blood flowed out of his nose, mouth, eyes, and ears. He was still laughing. He was smiling with forbearance and determination. There used to be a very strong super-rich family in Zhengzhou State. He said softly, I can't tell how powerful they were. They couldn't compare with the Wang family of Beihai, but they were much stronger than the Jiang family. They had a deep foundation, a long history, and a huge foundation. Such a rich family just made a wrong choice. He paused and continued, maybe it wasn't a mistake. In the process they made a lot of mistakes. Dad, do you know what their biggest mistake was? What? Jiang Shan was a little stunned. Their biggest mistake was that they didn't leave a good enough descendant in the end. So all the glory turned into misery. The patriarch of the rich family died in a long-planned air crash. The patriarch's wife committed suicide, countless industries were seized and auctioned, and the vassal families were fragmented. That family originally had descendants, but the most outstanding descendants were basically in prison. Some were sentenced to death and some were sentenced to life imprisonment. Oh, I forgot. They did have outstanding descendants, but the woman who was supposed to be the most capable of supporting the mess was crazy, completely crazy. She jumped from the highest place in Huading and regarded herself as a bird. In the end she fell and was smashed to pieces. That once glorious rich family, the whole family, even a dog, didn't have a good end in the end. He held the phone, his eyes were in a trance, and he whispered, from that time on, I knew that the pursuit of ultimate glory was the same as the pursuit of ultimate sin, a road of no return. So I understand what the Wang family of Beihai has done in recent years. I'm sure that if the Wang family of Beihai collapsed today, their end would be more tragic. As for our Jiang family, it may not be like this, but it's just because we are not as strong as them. Dad, if I don't fight and hide in Beijing after you retire, unless I'm willing to attach to a large group and be a puppet, how can I have a good end? In the current position of the Jiang family, if we don't climb up, we will fall into hell forever and never recover. Jiang Shan was silent and didn't know what to say for a moment. Jiang Shangyu's facial features were no longer bleeding. His spirit became more and more sluggish, but his voice became softer. Don't worry, Dad, I know what I'm doing. I've been preparing for many years. It's just the beginning to fight. I will lead the Jiang family to the position where we should exist. The struggle of the Jiang family for generations can't be in vain. Absolutely not. Jiang Shan smiled bitterly and didn't know what to say for a moment. Make some preparations. Jiang Shangyu whispered, Qingqing may go to Beijing after a while. I just promised Gu Xingyun that I would be a tour guide. Qingqing? Jiang Shan hesitated. Li Qingqing? Jiang Shangyu said, hey, Jiang Shan sneered. Doesn't Gu Han intend to make his daughter the new Phoenix Pavilion master? But it's normal for him to change his mind after seeing your performance today. He's going to use his daughter to force us to make a stand. It doesn't matter. Jiang Shangyu said calmly, in this situation we have to show our attitude. If I can get Qingqing, I'm willing. She shouldn't stay in a place like Kunlun City. Jiang Shan said. Just as he was about to speak, there was a sudden knock on the door. The secretary walked into his office. On the phone, Jiang Shangyu vaguely heard a sentence. Secretary, the decision-making committee has urgent documents. He smiled, hung up the phone silently, and sighed a little tiredly. The Wang family of Beihai. The Li family. He thought silently and felt like he was standing in the middle of the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family. So he could understand the Wang family of Beihai and Wang Tianzong's determination to kill Li Tianlan even if he had to break the rules. That was the indescribable pressure and fear accumulated over hundreds of years of glory. Climbing to the peak was a road of no return. When it came to what to carry, Wang Tianzong was the one who carried the most. He could also understand the Li family's forbearance. This was the attitude they had to show when they had nothing. Li Honghe and the Li family were forbearance. Li Tianlan had to show a stronger side at some time. What about himself? Jiang Shangyu thought silently. The Jiang family was never at the peak, but it was not nothing. Wasn't this the most awkward position in the middle? In such a position he had to endure something and carry something at the same time. The setting sun outside the window completely disappeared at the end of the sky. The night gradually covered the sky. The moment the light disappeared completely, Jiang Shangyu turned his head and looked out of the window. In the dim light of the night, there was a face without fanatical ambition but extremely persistent and firm. I finally wrote this chapter. Chapter 386. On the westernmost edge of the Sky Academy, there were several small but extremely exquisite villas. They were close to the river and the sea, far away from the arsenal, the training ground, and the teaching building. They were surrounded by the sound of flowing water all day long and were extremely quiet. This was the reception of the highest standard in the Sky Academy. The final maneuver of each session took about 10 days to half a month. During this period, some important figures who came to watch the ceremony were usually arranged here. Gu Xingyun had been to the Sky Academy several times. But this was the first time he lived here. He used to like living in the purple gold pavilion on the winter mountain of Huading very much. But now the purple gold pavilion had been violently destroyed by Li Tianlan, and he was injured. Under such circumstances, he only wanted to ensure his own safety to deal with the maneuver. Apart from that, he did not even think of stepping out of the Sky Academy. Even though he had a bodyguard who was even stronger than him at his peak, he could not help it. The hospital of the Sky Academy was about 2 or 3 kilometers away from the reception. As the night fell, Gu Xingyun and Li Shi walked side by side on the dimly lit path, keeping silent. The two of them walked quietly, neither fast nor slow, as if they were taking a stroll. Take a walk? Gu Xingyun had forgotten when was the last time he took a walk with Li Shi, just as he could not remember how long it had been since Li Shi smiled. Stepping on the Li family, ascending to the top of Zhongzhou State, glorious and known as the god of war. But he shared the same bed with the person who slept next to him. They were as close as ice, yet worlds apart. Gu Xingyun disliked Li Shi more and more. It wasn't that he didn't love her, it was just pure dislike. It wasn't just because of the humiliation she had suffered when she was with Li Guangtu. Moreover, with her by his side, Gu Xingyun often did not know whether his life was a success or a failure. With a beauty by his side, his authority was monstrous. But he was not complacent. He couldn't be complacent. So over the years he went back to Kunlun City less and less. Even if he went back, he basically didn't see Li Shi. If she hadn't been seriously injured this time and needed her protection, Li Shi would have left the moment the team maneuver ended. How about Jiang Shangyu? Gu Xingyun suddenly broke the silence. Li Shi's footsteps paused. An instinctive vigilance flashed in her eyes, and then she said numbly, "Very good. This is the person you think highly of?" Gu Xingyun laughed. "This is the most suitable person for Qingqing." Li Shi said, "Jiang Shangyu likes Qingqing. I'm sure of it. I like it very much. I like it very much, very affectionate." Li Shi had seen the way Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Qingqing several times. If he didn't have deep feelings in his heart, his eyes wouldn't have that kind of radiance. That's him then. Gu Xingyun nodded. "I respect your choice, but I will also respect Qingqing's choice. I'll let her contact Jiang Shangyu for a while. If it's appropriate, I don't mind marrying Qingqing to him." Li Shi glanced at Gu Xingyun indifferently. There was not the slightest bit of emotion in her eyes. Because she knew very well why Gu Xingyun did this. Today Li Tianlan proved his strength and potential. Today, in Zhongzhou State and even the whole world, countless wealthy and powerful families were paying attention to and even studying this rising heavenly sun. The combat capability of the invincible realm. Although he was only 22 years old, with such strength, how many people would dare to treat him as a young man? Li Tianlan was extremely dazzling. However, no matter how dazzling the light of the bright moon was, there would still be starlight around the moonlight. Wang Xingxiao, who had let go of his pride and preferred to chase after Li Tianlan, had his own light. Jiang Shangyu, who had found his own way, also had his own light. For Kunlun City, in today's maneuver, Gu Xingyun saw the horror of Li Tianlan, but he also recognized Jiang Shangyu's value. By keeping Li Qingqing by his side, Kunlun City now gained the Jiang family, and in the future, it would gain an invincible realm expert whose strength was absolutely not weak. This was all about interest. There was nothing to be touched. However, compared with Li Qingqing's original fate, this result seemed to be much better. Li Shi looked at Gu Xingyun's calm face. After a long silence, she nodded and said, "Qingqing will like it." "Maybe. Gu Xingyun didn't say yes or no. There was another long silence between the two. The small villa arranged by Zhuang Huayang for Gu Xingyun was right in front of him, but Gu Xingyun didn't go in. He just sat casually by the river, watching the river in his sight converge into the sea and rush forward. The river and sea glowed in the night. The light was reflected in Gu Xingyun's pupils, and his eyes looked extremely distant and vast. At this moment, Li Shi keenly noticed that Gu Xingyun's whole body was showing a kind of aura that was completely different from usual. His injury was still serious and almost fatal, but his spirit seemed to have jumped to a higher realm. "Do you want to leave me?" Gu Xingyun suddenly asked. Li Shi's body suddenly tightened, and she looked at Gu Xingyun with great vigilance. She never thought that this man would let her go, and naturally she didn't think about leaving. "These years I'm tired." Gu Xingyun looked at the rushing river and sea in his sight and said flatly, "If you have enough of this life now, I can give you a chance. After Qingqing gets married, leave your sword and martial arts and you can go with her." "Do you think I will believe you?" Li Shi stared at Gu Xingyun, and a touch of contempt gradually appeared in her eyes. "It's up to you to believe it or not." Gu Xingyun's tone did not fluctuate at all. "Of course I don't want you to leave. But it's actually meaningless to go on like this. For so many years I humiliated you and scolded you and I did a lot of wrong things. I'm not so narrow-minded. I just feel that you are no longer the Li Shi who was with me at the beginning, so I can't accept it. After so many years we have Qingqing. I keep you by my side because I want you to return to your original appearance. That kind of Li Shi is what I like most. A woman who can get close to Li Guangtu for me." Gu Xingyun's face was distorted, and then he laughed at himself. "But now it seems that it is impossible to go back to the past." Li Shi was silent for a long time. "She is dead." After a long time, Li Shi whispered, "The Li Shi in your heart died with him when she pierced Li Guangtu's chest with a sword. The one who survived was just a walking corpse without faith." "Dead?" Gu Xingyun stared at Li Shi's face. "Li Guangtu is dead?" Li Shi did not answer but calmly said, "Li Shi is also dead." Gu Xingyun laughed and the calmness in his eyes disappeared little by little. He became cold and vicious. "It seems that you really loved him." "I loved you," Li Shi whispered, "but a long time ago. I love him until now." The stars shone all over the sky and were reflected in the river. Li Shi stood quietly with her long hair flying and her white dress dancing. She was beautiful but without the slightest vitality of the mortal world. She was like a statue without the slightest breath of life. She was lifelike but had no soul. She stared blankly at the starlight in the river. After a long time she smiled sadly and said, "Actually, I don't blame you for bullying and scolding me all these years. It's just like how I never fought back. Many times I feel that you are right. I am indeed a bitch. Yes, I am a bitch. Otherwise how can I fall in love with two men? Everything I have suffered this year is what I should bear." Her smile gradually expanded in the night. "I'm sorry for many people. Now I can still have this kind of life. Why should I be dissatisfied? You are really sorry for many people." Gu Xingyun's eyes were cold. "But I am not sorry for you." Li Shi looked at Gu Xingyun with stubborn eyes. "You betrayed me, and you still say you are not sorry for me?" Gu Xingyun's face suddenly twisted, as if he had been stimulated by something. He lowered his voice and growled, "Bitch? You betrayed me. It is a betrayal. You let me betray you. If you hadn't asked me to get close to Li Guangtu back then, I would have always been by your side. No matter if you succeeded or failed, I would have been with you. I would have married you and given birth to your children instead of marrying Li Guangtu." "Shut up." Gu Xingyun growled and interrupted Li Shi's words. His eyes were as cold as the winter without any warmth. Li Shi looked at him with mocking and sarcastic eyes. "Get out. After Qingqing gets married, leave your martial arts and get out as far as possible." Gu Xingyun silently took out a cigarette and lit it. A cigarette burned out. In the sound of coughing he said in a hoarse voice, "When?" Li Shi asked blankly. "A few more years." Gu Xingyun's tone was cold. In a few years after his injury recovered, he would really enter the peak of the invincible realm. At that time Kunlun City would no longer need Li Shi who had a vague position or even Gu Qianchuan. He alone was enough to support the whole Kunlun City. That was his glory alone. Li Shi? This kind of woman who represented his shame had better get out as far as possible. "Okay." Li Shi nodded. She looked into the distance and her voice was very soft. Because it was light, it was soft. Gu Xingyun looked at her. He finally saw a touch of relaxation on the beautiful face that had been numb for many years. It was the longing and yearning after being surrounded by freedom. Gu Xingyun's heart kept sinking. However, a wave of anger that devoured all of his rationality continued to gush out, almost covering his entire body. What are you going to do after being free? Gu Xingyun suppressed the anger in his heart and asked calmly. Atonement, Li Shi said quietly. She would go to many places including East Island and Heaven Capital. She just wanted to atone. Atonement. The anger in Gu Xingyun's heart finally broke out. He laughed and his smile was extremely cold. Yes, you can do whatever you want. Li Shi, I've been focusing on seeking Tao recently. I plan to invite Master Xian Xuanzi to solve my doubts. What do you think? Master Xian Xuanzi? Li Shi's body shook violently, and her face suddenly turned pale. She suddenly turned to look at Gu Xingyun. She seemed to be very angry, but that anger was not a hysterical outburst, but a kind of helpless despair. What are you going to do? Li Shi asked. I'm threatening you. Gu Xingyun looked at Li Shi and said in a light tone, I can give you freedom. But that will be a few years later. As for these years, as the wife of the governor of Kunlun City, you have to do your duty. Li Shi looked at Gu Xingyun and her body trembled, becoming more and more powerless. Go to Snow Country. Gu Xingyun squinted and smiled. Such a big thing happened in Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan will definitely go to Snow Country. Oh, I heard that the Purgatory of Heaven Capital is also in Snow Country? Tut Didi, I hate this title. I don't want to know who he is, but this time you go to Snow Country on behalf of Kunlun City. They are all enemies. I will select a group of elites for you. At that time, in addition to getting our interest in Snow Country, I also want the heads of these two people. Li Tianlan. Deity. Neither of these two people can live. Do you understand? Li Shi's body fell to the ground softly, and the whole person was like an empty shell that had lost its soul. What happened last night? I won't harass Master Xian Xuanzi. You are free and so is Qingqing. Gu Xingyun looked at Li Shi with a smile. It's not difficult for you to kill two people, right? It's not that you haven't killed them before. It's nothing more than killing them again. Li Shi looked at Gu Xingyun dully, powerless and desperate. Gu Xingyun reached out and patted her still tender face. He looked into her eyes and said calmly, It's really pitiful. Mount Dibing. The night rain was hazy. After the maneuver, Wang Tianzong, who directly returned to Beihai from Huading, did not delay. He took Wang Xingxiao and Song Ci back to Mount Dibing at the fastest speed. Wang Xingxiao and Song Ci were seriously injured. Especially Wang Xingxiao, his injury could be said to be the heaviest of all. After Wang Tianzong sent Wang Xingxiao and Song Ci to the dormant room of Mount Dibing at the fastest speed, it was not until the night fell that Wang Xingxiao's vital signs slowly stabilized and he was out of danger. Wang Tianzong calmly put away the immortality potion that was ready to be used at any time and looked at the nutrition cabin in front of him. This was a wide vessel with a length of 4 or 5 meters. It was seamless and the whole body was shining with a strange metallic luster. There was an oxygen outlet at the front of the vessel, and the whole body was completely closed. Wang Xingxiao and Song Ci were half lying in the vessel, hand in hand, surrounded by precious gene potions. They closed their eyes as if they were sleeping, and their breathing was becoming more and more stable. It's all right. Summer Solstice stood beside Wang Tianzong and looked at the young man and woman in the vessel with soft eyes. Wang Tianzong said yes. Is it very troublesome for Song Ci? Summer Solstice suddenly asked. Song Ci's injury was not a big problem. But the problem was that she had abstained before the maneuver, and finally appeared in the lineup to besiege Li Tianlan, which was also breaking the rules. It's not a big problem. Wang Tianzong shook his head. They have already won and they won't hold on to this little thing. I guess now they are all focused on me and the matter of the little girl is not a big deal. He looked at Song Ci and suddenly said with a smile, This child is good. Really good. Summer Solstice also laughed. Sure is also good. Tang Shi and Song Ci, both daughters-in-law, are very good. Wang Tianzong glanced at his wife, took her hand and drove back to Emperor Hall. The lights were on in Emperor Hall. The document was still on the tea table in the hall. After Summer Solstice finished reading it, she never touched it. Wang Tianzong glanced at the document and looked at Summer Solstice. Take a bath first. Summer Solstice whispered, It's all over. Don't worry for the time being. Say it first. Wang Tianzong shook his head and tidied up the hair on his wife's forehead that was wet by the rain. Xia Ji pointed at the information on the tea table and frowned subconsciously. I can't explain it clearly. There are many things that I don't know. But you should read that information. If that information is true, then Li Tianlan really can't be touched. At the very least we can't move them for now. Wang Tianzong waved his hands. The document on the coffee table flew up and landed in his palm. Qin Weibai left it? Wang Tianzong asked. Xia Ji nodded. You read it first. I'll make tea for you. All right. Wang Tianzong sat down. On the sofa, he opened the documents in his hands. Summer Solstice went to a small hall and selected some scented tea. She boiled the water unhurriedly. It took about 20 minutes. She estimated that Wang Tianzong had seen enough, and then she returned to the hall with the teacup. Wang Tianzong was still sitting, holding the materials. His posture had not changed at all from before she left. Summer Solstice glanced at her husband's face. Under the soft light, Wang Tianzong's face was taut and his brows were tightly knitted. His eyes were still calm, but there was a kind of irritation that was hard to hide under a closer look. This kind of emotion was obscure, but it was so obvious. The Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, had never shown such obvious negative emotions in the past many years. Summer Solstice put the tea in front of Wang Tianzong and sat quietly beside him. Wang Tianzong held the materials tighter and tighter. Just when he was about to lose control of his emotions, Summer Solstice's voice sounded. Drink some water first. Why are you so angry? Wang Tianzong glanced at her, forced a smile, and reached out to pick up the teacup. The cold air rose from his palm, and a cup of hot tea instantly became cold. Wang Tianzong drank up the tea in one gulp. Everything on the materials is true, right? Summer Solstice asked softly. Wang Tianzong nodded silently. He was silent for a long time before he said, How did you get the materials? The materials came from Qin Weibai. Needless to say. But Wang Tianzong was confused about where did Qin Weibai get the materials? The information on this document was neither too much nor too little, but the content was extremely simple. The entire materials recorded more than 60 projects with an investment of more than 10 billion yuan that the Wang family of Beihai had invested in all over the world. Among them, the largest projects had an investment quota of more than 100 billion yuan. More than 60 projects involved a wide range of fields including steel, oil, mining, military, real estate, finance, automobiles, roads and bridges, civil aviation, ships, new energy. He had dabbled in countless fields. The information provided by Qin Weibai was about the things that could not be exposed to the public in these projects, or the most advanced technologies. That was simply the biggest weakness that could be used against him. Wang Tianzong could be sure that if this material did not appear here but was completely exposed, the Wang family of Beihai's investments in various places would directly lose at least 1 trillion yuan in less than a month. The market value of its major listed groups and multinational groups would evaporate even more unimaginably. The most important thing was that once this material was made public, the Wang family of Beihai would lose the trust of a considerable number of partners, and the overall economic strength of the Wang family of Beihai would suffer an unprecedented blow. All the consequences on Mount Dibing would definitely affect not only the Wang family of Beihai, but also tens of millions of people in the entire Beihai province. Beihai province belonged to Zhongzhou State, but this most special province actually belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. Beihai people all over the world would say that they were from Beihai, not Beihai people of Zhongzhou State, no matter where they went. Among all the provinces in Zhongzhou State, only the people of Beihai province had this kind of pride. This was equivalent to a rather thorough one country, two systems system. The independence of Beihai province was far greater than any autonomous region in Zhongzhou State. Once the economy of the Wang family of Beihai was hit hard, it would be a complete disaster for Beihai province. The allowance of hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the Beihai Corps was reduced. The military budget was reduced. The treatment of civil servants in Beihai was reduced. The budgets of various cutting-edge scientific research projects were reduced. The funds of various intelligence agencies and special warfare agencies of the Wang family of Beihai were reduced. Beihai Bank raised interest rates. Taxes increased. Prices rose, and so on. Of course, to some extent, this situation could not happen. As long as Wang Tianzong asked for help from Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State would not hesitate to provide a lot of support, but it would also not hesitate to take away part of the leadership of Beihai province. Whether it was the possible disaster or the consequences of asking for help from Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong could not accept it. Absolutely unacceptable. Unimaginable consequences? If he killed Li Tianlan today, Qin Weibai would make all this information public, and the consequences would be more than unimaginable. But the question was, where did Qin Weibai get this information? Where did she get it? Wang Tianzong's inner irritation kept surging, and his eyes became extremely cold. Qinglei, summer solstice reminded him calmly. Oh. Wang Tianzong shook his head. He doesn't dare to joke about the foundation of Beihai province. And even if he is really willing to give it, he doesn't know most of the things in it. Summer solstice still wanted to say something, but then she shook her head. The current economy of the Wang family of Beihai was controlled by Tang Shi. Only she and Wang Tianzong knew many top-secret projects. But it was also impossible for her to betray the Wang family of Beihai. It was absolutely impossible. Where on earth did Qin Weibai get this information? Wang Tianzong took a big drag on the cigarette and said nothing. This information could be said to be an absolute trump card, and its weight was even more useful than several invincible realm experts standing in front of Wang Tianzong. It's okay. After smoking a cigarette sullenly, Wang Tianzong threw away the cigarette butt. At least it's a good thing that this information hasn't been made public. Is there no other way? Summer solstice looked at Wang Tianzong. The information hadn't been made public. But this information was like a sharp sword in the hands of the enemy, which really made people restless. Of course there is a way. Wang Tianzong shook his head. But Li Tianlan may have to live for a while. He knocked on the information in his hand. The problems here are more complicated. Many of them are black box operations and power money transactions. Once they are made public, the reputation of the Wang family of Beihai will decline, its strength will be damaged, and the Wang family of Beihai will have many twists and turns, and we will also offend many good partners. Many of Shishi's operating methods are relatively radical, but they are effective and profitable. The key is that she does it very safely. Even if there are some problems, they will not be known, let alone should not be known. But Qin Weibai knows. Summer solstice said softly. I'm also wondering about this problem. Wang Tianzong said, but it doesn't matter. What is written in this information are all hidden dangers. This is indeed the most deadly threat, but since it is a hidden danger, it can naturally be eliminated. But I need time, at most half a year, and the problem above will no longer be a problem. He looked at the information in his hand and whispered to himself, what if I let him live for another half a year? He threw the information on the table, took out his mobile phone, and directly dialed Xian Ming's number. Your Majesty. On the phone, Xian Ming's tone was calm. There is one thing that you need to check in person. Wang Tianzong said. Your Majesty, please tell me. Xian Ming's voice remained unchanged. Although he had not participated in the specific operation of the intelligence agency in recent years and was only responsible for controlling the overall situation, it did not mean that his ability had declined. Check Qin Weibai. There is something wrong with this person. Within a month, I want all her information, dig deep and start from her childhood. Didn't the information say that she was born in the southwest? Then start from the southwest 20 years ago. Wang Tianzong said calmly, I want all her information. You go ahead and do it at all costs. Genius 1 second to remember this website's address. Mobile version. Chapter 387. When there was a victory, there would naturally be a celebration. The celebration banquet of the East Emperor Palace came to an end at dusk when the night was getting dark. After turning off Yu's private kitchen, Yu Donglai, who rarely cooked in person. The East Emperor Palace ushered in the busiest day since its establishment. Before yesterday, this manor built in the beautiful suburbs of Huading still had the sign of Hanyu Palace hanging on it. The name of East Emperor Palace was more like the recognition in the hearts of some of its own people. When the maneuver was over and the celebration banquet came to an end, Li Tianlan personally hung the plaque with the words, East Emperor Palace, written by him 3 years ago in front of the gate. Li Beidian, who was seriously injured and drunk, sat in a wheelchair and looked at this scene. He squinted and pulled Su Chu, who was pale beside him, and smirked. This plaque was stolen from first senior brother after I got him drunk in Mount Shu. Isn't it domineering? It's not too late to hang it up now. I'll go back to Mount Shu in 2 days and bring some elite swordsmen down the mountain. The East Emperor Palace is officially established. After everyone graduates, the framework should be set up as soon as possible. Old Su, you are the first senior brother of Jade Pool. Don't you plan to trick some people from Jade Pool to come over? It depends on the marshal and the little junior sister. Su Chu shook his head honestly. His situation was completely different from Li Baitian's. The first senior brother of Jade Pool had a high status, but in the end he was just a junior. At least at present, he had no right to bring the brothers of Jade Pool to the East Emperor Palace. But Li Baitian was different. He was very young, but in terms of seniority he was an absolute elder. The great Void Sword Master of Mount Shu could be said to be one of the four main forces of Mount Shu. Thousands of swordsmen in Mount Shu practiced swordsmanship on the mountain, dreaming of being accepted as a disciple by a certain sword master. Li Baitian was now in the thunder-shocking realm and barely qualified to form his own sect in Mount Shu. The people he selected were all his disciples when they left Mount Shu. Joining the East Emperor Palace was just a matter of a word from Li Baitian. With such an identity, Su Chu could not compare at all. Only Dongqing Rushi or Dongqing Wudi could do it. Especially the latter. Most of the elders in Mount Shu, including the sect leader, had to call Dongqing Wudi senior brother when they saw him. Now, some things can indeed be done. Dongqing Wudi glanced at Li Baitian and said with a smile, "But you've just started, so you'd better be careful about the candidates. The quality of your swordsmen in Mount Shu is not bad. But in your current situation, a East Emperor Palace with 200 core members is already the limit of operation. Before you grow stronger, the East Emperor Palace needs absolute elites. I will make arrangements for that as well. Taishu, you have to be careful when you choose." Dongqing Wudi said. Great Void, the corner of Li Baitian's mouth twitched as he cursed in his heart. He nodded and said, "I will discuss it with Tianlan." Dongqing Wudi nodded with a smile and looked at Li Tianlan, who was fixing the plaque under the light. The celebration feast was coming to an end. But the party was not destined to end. This day could be said to be a crucial day for Li Tianlan. He established his position in Zhongzhou State with his own strength. East Emperor Palace officially appeared in Zhongzhou State. The Dongqing clan, Sai City, the Li family, Mount Shu, Jade Pool, and even the government of Zhongzhou State would select the most trustworthy talents to join East Emperor Palace and build the strongest power framework in the shortest time. Tonight was just the beginning. If the Yuzhou conference some time ago was the beginning of the Li family's comeback, then tonight was the beginning of Li Tianlan and East Emperor Palace. It had nothing to do with anything. Dongqing Wudi glanced at Lin Yuxian, who was standing aside and smiling quietly. The Lin clan was little known in the dark world. But for people at Dongqing Wudi's level, it was naturally not a big secret. But in the past many years, in Dongqing Wudi's impression, the concept of the Lin clan was actually very general. Even Dongqing Wudi did not think the concept of the Lin clan was so real. This was a group all over the world. They could be found in South America, North America, Eurasia, and even Australia in the Southern Hemisphere. In any place they were not strong enough to control the situation. But everywhere they had an influence that could not be ignored. They would cooperate with each other, but the connection was extremely messy. They were not united with each other. They annexed each other and had many conspiracies. This was a behemoth that was completely different from the Wang family of Beihai. All the branches of the Wang family of Beihai were in Beihai province. They built Beihai province into an iron plate, vaguely with the meaning of China. With the Wang family of Beihai as the core, they influenced Zhongzhou State and established the Southeast Group. Finally, after Zhongzhou State became a behemoth that could easily influence the overall situation, their influence began to radiate all over the world. The entire Wang family of Beihai was like a towering tree rooted in Zhongzhou State, covering the sky and the sun. On the other hand, the so-called Lin clan was like a forest, spreading branches and leaves all over the world, and basically, there was no connection between them. They also had vicious competition with each other and even fought to the death. There were no constraints between them and they could do whatever they wanted. 3 years ago, when Lin Fengting went to Zhongzhou State, Dongqing Wudi knew the headquarters of the Lin clan in Switzerland. If it were not for the existence of the headquarters of the Lin clan, in the eyes of Dongqing Wudi, the so-called Lin clan was a group of wealthy families and successful businessmen, or politicians and warlords scattered all over the world. The only thing they had in common was that they all had the surname Lin. The people in the headquarters of the Lin clan did not make money, do business, engage in politics, or engage in intelligence. They did not have to do anything. The patriarch of each generation of the Lin clan did not need to be the so-called great talent and strategy, wisdom and martial arts. The entire Lin clan had only one requirement for the patriarch. That was, the patriarch must be an absolute strong man. That was the patron saint of the entire Lin clan. When any branch of the Lin clan encountered an irresistible external threat, the patron saint of the headquarters of the Lin clan was obliged to help his own branch solve the trouble. The solution could be to use force to suppress them. It could also mobilize the resources of other branches to fight against external forces together. This was the power of the patriarch of the Lin clan. It could be seen and touched. Everyone in the Lin clan could break away from the headquarters and form a new branch on their own. The headquarters gave the branch not only shelter in times of crisis, but also an unimaginable sum of money. But such shelter and giving were not free. Any group or family established by an independent branch would hand over 20% of its benefits to the headquarters, and it would be handed in permanently and passed on from generation to generation. If they did not agree to this clause at the beginning, no one would get the money. Even if they reneged halfway, the Lin clan would recover the initial funds according to the interest according to the original agreement and cancel the protection of the branch. Every year, the headquarters of the Lin clan would take 20% of the total income of each branch. These interests were placed in the headquarters of the Lin clan, which was too lazy to invest or even spend money. It was a huge cash flow that was enough to make anyone crazy. The people of the Lin clan who attempted to set up a branch would get a sum of their own funds from these cash flows. In this way there would be more and more branches of the Lin clan, and the income of the headquarters would also increase. The resources that the patriarch could mobilize and the responsibilities on his shoulders would also increase. Eventually it would become a very delicate cycle. This was a quite novel operation model. For hundreds of years, the model of the Lin clan continued to mature. Until today, for so many years, even though the Wang family of Beihai would have an extremely bloody massacre every few decades or hundreds of years, the Lin clan had always been stable. The major branches would fight against each other, but the Lin clan had never had any disaster that would engulf the whole clan. They spread out all over the world and they would not have the power to say anything in any place. But their hidden strength under the water was enough to ensure the stability and interests of the whole clan. The Wang family of Beihai. The Lin clan. Two completely different modes of operation and two completely different attitudes toward life. This was the rule set by their ancestors. The only chosen one ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years seemed to always have an unparalleled aggressiveness. He hoped that his descendants would move forward with increasing responsibilities, with absolute force and power, and always stand at the top of the world, overlooking all the others. Therefore, most of the patriarchs of the Wang family of Beihai were peerless heroes. However, the patriarchs of the Lin clan just quietly guarded their growing Lin clan. They were calm, stable, and leisurely. Dongqing Wudi had studied the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan in detail. He could not evaluate the state of mind of the two ancestors. But today he could be sure that the overall strength of the Lin clan would not be weaker than that of the Wang family of Beihai, which was highly concentrated in power. At least it would not be much worse. Dongqing Wudi knew the identity of Lin Yuxian. Dongqing Wudi was surprised and pleasantly surprised that Li Tianlan and Lin Yuxian were involved with the Lin clan. The East Emperor Palace was established. If the Lin clan was willing to introduce some talents to the East Emperor Palace, Li Tianlan's future would undoubtedly be broader. Whoosh! The dull sound of breaking through the air rang out. Countless fireworks rose in the East Emperor Palace. Dongqing Wudi came to his senses. In his sight, Li Tianlan had fixed the plaque of the East Emperor Palace in front of the door. All the lights of the East Emperor Palace were turned off. Rows of fireworks rose high into the sky, shining in the night. It seemed that they would never stop. The entire East Emperor Palace was transformed into a hazy and blurred brilliance in the blooming fireworks. Except for Li Beidian, who was still sitting in a wheelchair, Li Tianlan was lifted up by everyone. They shouted the East Emperor Palace and threw Li Tianlan into the sky again and again. Li Tianlan's hearty laughter rang out in the aftermath of the fireworks, so clear and so relaxed. Dongqing Wudi stared at Li Tianlan quietly. His smile and eyes were soft. Finally he sighed quietly. "Dad, everything is on track." In the gentle voice, Dongqing Qiuqi, one of the 13 directors of Huading, came over. "You don't seem very happy. How come?" Dongqing Wudi laughed. "I just feel. The decisive god of massacre hesitated, but he didn't know how to describe his feelings. "Do you feel guilty?" Dongqing Qiuqi stared at her father's face. Dongqing Wudi was stunned. He reached out and touched his daughter's head. "What about Uncle Zhonghu and the others?" Dongqing Qiuqi glanced at the crowd. In the crowd, the tall Li Zhonghu was particularly eye-catching. The Major General, who had been in the Border Control Corps for nearly 30 years and was only Dongqing Wudi's bodyguard at the beginning, huddled with a group of young people, laughing boldly and happily. "I'll make arrangements," Dongqing Wudi said. Not only Li Zhonghu. Today, Dongqing Wudi had to make proper arrangements for the 40,000 people from the 4 armies of the Border Control Corps. It's not easy. Dongqing Qiuqi frowned slightly. Today's matter is very complicated. Wang Tianzong wants to kill Tianlan, which is a violation of the rules. But you mobilize the army, which is even more against the rules. The giant group and the academics will now target Wang Tianzong, but you will also become the target of the Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group. It is estimated that the decision-making committee will hold an emergency plenary meeting no later than tomorrow. Don't worry. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. I'm mentally prepared. This time it's not a problem for me. This time it really can't shake you. Dongqing Qiuqi said, but after this meeting the youngest marshal in Zhongzhou state will appear, right? Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes and thought of the double thunder veins of the Wang family of Beihai. Dijiang. He was currently the most likely candidate to be the new commander of the Border Control Corps. Dongqing Wudi knew the pattern of the Wang family of Beihai. In each generation of the Wang family of Beihai, there would be at least 2 experts at the peak of the invincible realm. This generation was Wang Tianzong and Summer Solstice. However, Summer Solstice's state was a little special. After hurting her foundation, Wang Tianzong had borne everyone's responsibility for many years. What about the next generation? Wang Xingxiao was bound to be one of them. But the other expert at the peak of the invincible realm might be Song Ci. But at present, the biggest possibility was Dijiang. After a strike at the lower realm, Wang Xingxiao's realm regressed, and Dijiang would even reach the peak of the invincible realm earlier than Wang Xingxiao. As expected, Dongqing Wudi said calmly. He thought of Dijiang, but his eyes always fell on Li Tianlan. The phone rang. Dongqing Wudi took out his mobile phone and raised his eyebrows when he saw the number on the phone. The sound of fireworks kept ringing out. Dongqing Wudi walked into East Emperor Palace and answered the phone. Dongqing Qiuqi quietly followed her father. The phone call lasted a short time. But Dongqing Qiuqi clearly saw that her father's face became gloomy almost at a speed visible to the naked eye. He silently hung up the phone and glanced at Dongqing Qiuqi. Call Tianlan here. What happened? Dongqing Qiuqi asked subconsciously. Dongqing Wudi shook his head, gritted his teeth and said, Snow Country. It was the night of July 31st in Zhongzhou State. It was the morning of August 1st in Snow Country. After the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, the turbulent situation in Eastern Europe finally exploded. The intelligence organization of the Jiang family of South America finally determined the location of the largest group of elites of Samsara Palace in Snow Country. Jiang Qiansong, the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, personally hunted them down. The Dark Knights protected the retreat of the largest group of elites of Samsara Palace. The chief of Knights Templars, Chaos, an expert of the Invincible Realm, and Jiang Qiansong joined forces. The 2 experts of the Invincible Realm slaughtered nearly half of the elites of Samsara Palace and the Dark Knights in one fell swoop. The battle took place in the capital of Im in Eastern Europe. No one knew whether it was a coincidence or intentional. The place where the battle detonated happened to be near the garrison base of Zhongzhou State in Im. The crazy flames of war spread everywhere in Im. More than 3,000 of the more than 10,000 garrison troops of Zhongzhou State in Im were killed or wounded. The Im government conveyed the news to Zhongzhou State as soon as possible. The high-level officials of Zhongzhou State were furious and decided to hold a high-level meeting at the first time. All the 9 directors attended. In this high-level meeting, in addition to all the high-level officials, 3 people were specially invited. One was Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong, who was famous in the Dark World. The other was Dijiang, the first disciple of Wang Tianzong. The last one was Li Tianlan. Feng Poli. Genius 1 second to remember the address of this website. Mobile version, M. Chapter 388. Midsummer in August. When it was almost 5 a.m., Yuzhou province had already been dimly lit. The carnival in Huading continued. Dongqing Wudi and Li Tianlan had arrived in Yuzhou from Huading. The meeting was scheduled for 6:30 in the morning. There were still 2 hours left. At that time, President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State, who was visiting Star State, would probably be able to return to Yuzhou. Some members of the decision-making committee outside Yuzhou could also arrive at the venue. A black Mercedes-Benz drove slowly on Chang'an Street. In the glimmer of dawn, Li Tianlan sat behind the Mercedes-Benz and quietly looked at the mobile phone in his hand. On the screen was still a photo of him and Qin Weibai snuggling together in the Sky Academy 3 years ago. The screen lit up. No calls, no text messages. Li Tianlan stared at the phone, becoming more and more silent. Still no news. Dongqing Wudi patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder and said in a gentle voice, "Don't worry too much. It happened suddenly and there are many things to deal with. Isn't the patron saint of the Lin clan with Bosch Qin? It'll be fine." Li Tianlan nodded silently and dialed Qin Weibai's number again. Emotionless English came through the phone. If translated into Chinese, it would probably mean that the call could not be connected. Qin Weibai's phone could not be connected. Lin Fengting and Flaming Fire also could not get through. Li Tianlan's eyebrows twitched slightly. He took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. The storm in Eastern Europe continued to spread around the world. The capital of Im has now become the focus of the world's attention, and countless news radiates all over the world, true and false, chaotic. The garrison of Zhongzhou State in Im had barely completed the repair. At this time it was confirmed that nearly 1,000 garrison troops had died, nearly 2,000 soldiers were injured, and hundreds of people were missing. The largest group of elites of the Samsara Palace hidden in Snow Country was almost wiped out. The first group of elites of the Dark Knights, which had always had a good relationship with the Samsara Palace, also suffered heavy casualties when they arrived in Eastern Europe. The Jiang family of South America and Knights Templars were also injured, but with 2 invincible realm experts holding the line, their losses were negligible compared to the Samsara Palace and the Dark Knights. What Li Tianlan wanted to know most now was how Qin Weibai, who was also in Snow Country, was doing. He knew that Qin Weibai was in Snow Country, but he was not sure if Qin Weibai was with the elites of Samsara Palace. His mind was in a mess. Li Tianlan shook his head hard, pursed his lips and looked out of the window. The morning sun rose in Yuzhou. Under the faint golden sunlight, it was a calm and indifferent yet extremely dangerous face. "You are confused because you care too much." Dongqing Wudi shook his head. "Even the higher-ups of Zhongzhou State have more confidence in Bosch Qin than you do. Han Dun and Jiang Qiansong are indeed invincible, but even if the 2 of them join forces, they won't be a match for Lin Fengting. What are you worried about?" "I'm not worried about Lin Fengting," Li Tianlan said calmly. He had seen Lin Fengting's sword. Even now, he still could not estimate that kind of strength, so Lin Fengting would definitely be fine. However, his strength did not mean that it was Qin Weibai's strength. In this chaotic battle, if Lin Fengting were to be careless, it's good news that there's no news from Bosch Qin. Zhongzhou State has more than a garrison in Im. Our strength there is still good. We didn't get any information about Bosch Qin, which probably means that Bosch Qin is not in Im at all. I think this is also the reason why we specially invited you to attend this high-level meeting," Dongqing Wudi said. "Reason?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. He really didn't understand why he was invited to this high-level meeting. "Because of your relationship with the Samsara Palace," Dongqing Wudi said slowly. "Wang Tianzong destroyed the headquarters of the Samsara Palace with one sword stroke. The palace master died, and the Samsara Palace was leaderless and suffered heavy losses. But the basic framework of the Samsara Palace is still there. They occupy some resources abroad, rich contacts, special channels, especially the intelligence system. The intelligence system of the Samsara Palace is simply unparalleled in the world. In a short time, it is difficult for these to completely disappear with the death of the master of the Samsara Palace." Dongqing Wudi looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. "What's more, everyone knows the particularity of the Samsara Palace. The palace master trusts Qin Weibai 100%. When the will of the palace master remains silent, Qin Weibai's will is the will of the Samsara Palace. And Qin Weibai is your woman." "So?" Li Tianlan was expressionless. He had understood something. "So the death of the master of the Samsara Palace has a great impact on the Samsara Palace, but it can be said that it is not very big. Because too many things are controlled by Qin Weibai. At present, if any superpower annexes the current Samsara Palace, it may lead to the extreme expansion of their strength and influence. The current Eastern Europe is simply full of benefits and opportunities for the Dark World. The right to speak in the Dark World of Eastern Europe, the incomplete Polar Ground Alliance and the Samsara Palace, the advance and retreat of countless powerful families, and the direction of the situation of more than a dozen countries in Eastern Europe in the future will make people completely lose their minds. You are invited to attend this high-level meeting. Obviously, the government has taken the Samsara Palace as a target and intends to swallow it first. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Tianlan's face and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. What a good appetite. Li Tianlan's tone was cold. For the Samsara Palace this is not a bad thing. Dongqing Wudi said meaningfully, you are in Zhongzhou State. It is very convenient for the high level to contact the Samsara Palace through you, but it also means that a lot of things can be discussed. The Samsara Palace is weak because they have lost the palace master. But if they have the support of Zhongzhou State, the strength of Zhongzhou State's support may not be less than that of an invincible realm expert. If the two sides reach an agreement, the Samsara Palace should be able to be the overseas force of Zhongzhou State under the condition of ensuring a certain degree of independence. This is good for you, for Zhongzhou State and for the Samsara Palace. Like East Island and Night Spirit before? Li Tianlan asked. Almost. Dongqing Wudi nodded. I invited you to this meeting in the hope that you can persuade Qin Weibai. Boss Qin is a goddess in the eyes of others, high and unfathomable, but she can't refuse your request. If this matter is settled, the strength of Zhongzhou State will be enhanced, and it will be a great contribution to you. He paused and continued, and this time I can guarantee that out of public interest, the resources of the Samsara Palace will not be shared with the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. There was one more sentence he didn't say. If it was out of public interest, it would naturally not let Li Tianlan lead. If Li Tianlan led the Samsara Palace, he was afraid that the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City would desperately oppose it. This huge force would eventually serve the country in the purest way. The real leader could only be an absolute neutral force that did not participate in the internal affairs of Zhongzhou State at all. Zhongzhou State, the Terracotta Army, the four spirit generals. Li Tianlan was silent. If this was the case, it was really not a bad thing for the Samsara Palace and himself. But the truth was not so. He glanced at Dongqing Wudi. He found that Dongqing Wudi's eyes were also shining with the light of excitement. Li Tianlan smiled. If it were before yesterday he might still have some hesitation. But after the maneuver, the connection between him and the Dongqing clan could no longer be separated, so naturally he didn't need to avoid anything. In the headquarters of the Samsara Palace, it was Shadowless who died. Li Tianlan said. At this moment he suddenly thought of the text message that Qin Weibai sent him. After the headquarters of the Samsara Palace was destroyed, the whole Samsara would turn from bright to dark. Was the destruction of a large number of elites of the Samsara Palace just part of the plan of the Samsara Palace? Li Tianlan's thought just came up and then it was extinguished. How could such a big sacrifice be possible? What do you mean? Dongqing Wudi froze for a moment and didn't understand. It means that the master of Samsara Palace didn't die. Li Tianlan whispered, she is in the dark. Snow Country. Mormons. In the cold but extremely luxurious manor, Qin Weibai stood quietly in front of the fountain in the main villa of the manor, looking at the water rushing into the sky with no expression on her face. Even in the middle of summer. Even in the polar night. Mormons was still extremely cold. But Qin Weibai wore very thin clothes. Black straight pants, boots and a thin white sweater. In the open-air environment where the temperature was close to 0 degrees, she stood motionless, looking like a statue. Her thin clothing accentuated her figure perfectly. Front and back, left and right. No matter from which angle, it was a beautiful scene, but it was so beautiful that people didn't dare to look at it directly. Occasionally people came in and out of the manor, but no one dared to look at Qin Weibai. From a human's aesthetic point of view, she was indeed extremely beautiful. But at this moment her entire body exuded a powerful aura that kept people away from her. It was not the so-called martial arts domain formed by sword intent and strength. It was a pure aura, piercingly cold, inviolable. Flaming fire stood less than 10 meters away from Qin Weibai without saying a word. She held Qin Weibai's coat with both hands and also said nothing. She had been with her boss for many years, but she rarely saw her boss in such a state at this time. In such a state, even the person beside her did not dare to say a word. Qin Weibai had been standing here for nearly 40 minutes. The near-zero temperature was a little cold, but it made people sober. She stood there motionlessly, and her face was still flushed with anger. Li Tianlan guessed right. Such a great sacrifice was just part of Samsara Palace's turning from light to dark. It was really impossible. The Jiang family of South America's raid wiped out the largest group of elites of Samsara Palace in Snow Country. This was completely out of Qin Weibai's plan. In the final battle of Snow Country, there were few super masters that Samsara Palace could use. However, the 12 super masters were not all the assets of Samsara Palace. They were only the superiors at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Samsara Palace naturally had some thunder-shocking realm experts who were slightly weaker. The group of Samsara Palace elites in IM had more than 1,000 people. Whether in terms of overall combat capability or number, it could be said to be the top priority of Samsara Palace. More than a dozen thunder-shocking realm experts, nearly 200 fire-flaming realm experts, and some technicians were wiped out overnight. Even Qin Weibai couldn't bear such a heavy loss. What made her even angrier was that Samsara Palace had a unique intelligence agency in the world, but she got the news later than any other force in the world. This was obviously a cooperation between multiple forces. The Jiang family of South America and Knights Templars were only responsible for taking action, but there were obviously other forces secretly mobilizing the national resources of Snow Country. All the communication signals in Mormon City were completely blocked for nearly 5 hours. By the time Samsara Palace realized that something was wrong and used their connections to lift the city signal block, the news of Samsara Palace's heavy loss had spread all over the world. Until now, Qin Weibai had not yet found out what had gone wrong, so that the group of elites had completely exposed their whereabouts. In just one more day, the elites could take IM as their base and eventually break up and disperse to all corners of Eastern Europe. But when everything was ready, the raid of the Jiang family of South America could be said to be a real blow to the head. The largest force in Qin Weibai's hand was broken up. She was bound to adjust her plan again in the next time. Time was so tight. Qin Weibai felt the pressure that almost made her breathless at the first time. The phone suddenly rang. Flaming Fire took out the phone from Qin Weibai's coat and looked at the caller ID. The note on the caller ID was very simple. It was not the husband that many young people like to note. It was not my dear. It was not any intimate address. It was him. There was only one word. Flaming Fire's eyes lit up. She walked quickly to Qin Weibai and whispered, "Boss, it's a call from His Highness Tianlan." Qin Weibai froze for a moment, took a deep breath and adjusted her emotions. Her fingers were still trembling a little because of anger, but her eyes had softened in a very short time. She thought about it, hung up the phone, opened the communication software, and sent a video communication to Li Tianlan. The video was connected in the fastest time. Li Tianlan's face appeared on the screen of the phone. Qin Weibai looked down at the face on the screen. After a few seconds she laughed softly. "What's wrong? Do you miss me? I heard about him. Where are you?" Li Tianlan's focused eyes seemed to relax a little, and he asked softly. Qin Weibai's eyes flickered and she said calmly, "I'm not in IM. It was a little late when I got the news and it was too late to do anything. It's my mistake." She was still very angry, but her eyes were extremely gentle. This kind of anger and affection mixed together made her look different from all her usual postures, and she looked a little aggrieved. No matter how strong a woman was in front of the man she loved, she would be weak and fragile. Li Tianlan's heart trembled and he said without hesitation, "I'll go to Snow Country." "No." Qin Weibai's eyes changed and she said instinctively. Li Tianlan stopped talking, just looked at Qin Weibai's face across the screen. "It's too messy here. It's not a good place for you. Honey, will you go to Tianan?" Qin Weibai said cautiously. "You're in Snow Country. How can I rest assured if I don't go?" Li Tianlan looked at her and whispered, "The more dangerous it is, the more I want to go unless you come back now." Qin Weibai held the phone and murmured, "I can't leave." Li Tianlan smiled and nodded. "It's good that you're fine. Wait for me in Snow Country." The screen paused. The video was hung up immediately. Qin Weibai held the phone and was silent for a long time. When the maneuver was about to begin, she let the headquarters of Samsara Palace sink into the deep sea because she didn't want Li Tianlan to get out. She never doubted that Li Tianlan could win the maneuver, but she felt that he would be seriously injured and then unable to participate in the general trend of Snow Country. But Li Tianlan was not injured. She didn't want Li Tianlan to come to Snow Country. But Li Tianlan hung up the phone. He also didn't want the elites of Samsara Palace in Snow Country to be exposed. But now that group of elites had been completely annihilated. The general trend of Eastern Europe was in chaos. The superpowers and the governments of big countries that were qualified to play here were quietly involved. Some people might be extremely smart, with great wisdom close to that of a demon. But no one had ever been able to truly control the world. So the overall situation that Qin Weibai controlled began to get out of control little by little. This was destined to be just the beginning. And as time went on, in the general trend, maybe all the forces would slowly get out of control. No one could control everything. The key to how the general trend tilted was to see how the chess player played every card in his hand after the situation was out of control. Qin Weibai handed the phone to Flaming Fire. She seemed to really calm down. Tianlan is coming? A voice suddenly sounded. Lin Fengting appeared behind Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai nodded and said yes. What's your plan? Lin Fengting looked at Qin Weibai and asked. Qin Weibai was silent for a long time before she slowly said, It's good that we don't see each other. It was good that they didn't see each other. She spoke very slowly, and there seemed to be an unforgettable power between the lines. Lin Fengting stopped talking. Go to the basement. After saying this, Qin Weibai turned and walked directly into the main villa of the manor. There was an extremely hidden passage in the corner of the main villa. The passage was very narrow. It went all the way down, deep and winding. Qin Weibai walked in front. Lin Fengting was behind. Flaming Fire was the last. The three of them walked in the passage for nearly 5 minutes. The narrow passage gradually widened. The passage widened and the top of their heads became higher. At the end of the passage was a huge hall made entirely of metal. A house was built in the middle of the hall. There were no windows in the house, only one door. The 4 walls of the house, including the door panel, were made of alloy metal, with a thickness of tens of meters, which looked magnificent. A majestic prison cell. Qin Weibai walked to the door of the cell and said calmly, Open the door. A staff member in the hall opened the door. A huge roar like a magic sound suddenly rushed out of the cell, extremely crazy and violent. In the cell stood a burly figure with heavy metal shackles all over his body. He was at least 2 meters tall, so burly that he was almost huge. The metal shackles fixed his hands and feet. He was covered in blood, his eyes were red and he was listless. But the whole person was still full of an indescribable majesty and anger. Seeing Qin Weibai standing in front of the door, a trace of killing intent and anger flashed in his eyes. In a crazy roar he took a step forward. The metal shackles seemed to be extremely heavy. His figure swayed and he almost fell to the ground. But he still tried his best to move forward again. Qin Weibai reached out a hand. Her slender and fair fingers pressed on a metal button beside the door. The innermost wall of the metal cell suddenly lit up. The giant with the metal shackles suddenly roared, but his body flew uncontrollably. Bang! In the dull sound his whole body was directly sucked to the wall. As the button was pressed, the whole cell became a huge magnet. The giant with the metal shackles was sucked to the wall, and it was extremely difficult for him to move. Lin Fengting appeared beside Qin Weibai. The giant's eyes stared at Lin Fengting. His eyes were angry, but the whole person gradually calmed down. Qin Weibai pressed another button. The lit wall suddenly went out, and the shackles on the giant were completely opened. He fell to the ground with unprecedented freedom. He seemed to be stunned and didn't know what to do for a moment. You have 2 choices. Qin Weibai's cold voice sounded clear and sweet. First, kill your way out of here. You may kill me, but it is more likely that Mr. Lin will kill you. Everything you have will become non-existent. Second, crawl out of here. Be my dog and crawl to the place where you should go. You will get my promise, the promise at the beginning. The giant looked at Qin Weibai angrily. Qin Weibai looked into his eyes without fear. In the oppressive and almost suffocating silence, the giant clenched his fists. He wanted to rush out, but in the end, his huge body crawled down and took a step forward. Pa! A black pill was thrown out of Qin Weibai's hand and rolled in front of the giant, extremely dazzling. It. Qin Weibai ordered. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.